Good evening, morning, afternoon, whatever applies to you, and welcome back to yet another EuroLeague. I am joined today by the brothers Hapgood. There is a unconfirmed rumor that Kira is trapped in some Eastern European gulag. I can neither confirm nor deny. We just don't know at this point. We don't know.
One of his tweets did him in finally. Yeah.
Yeah, whether or not that's just a euphemism for him being incredibly hungover, or just who knows? We just there's not enough information at this point.
Dude, if that's the case, it's so funny how he's like, oh yeah, I'm not available for like 3 days. I'm like, if that's a hangover, oh my god, that's like Disco Elysium.
That's what,
Yeah.
that is
The,
what
that
aging
that
does
the
to you.
ancient reptilian brain is giving him knowledge on League of Legends right now.
But before, Sam, we talk about any League of Legends, we do, of course, have to tackle my patented Would You Rather. And it is actually League themed today. It's rather dystopian, much like Disco Elysium in many ways. Although, different interpretations. I don't know what ending you guys got, but mine was actually fairly positive. So there you go.
Mine was
Anyway,
okay too.
my question is, Sam, I will start with you. When its time comes, would you rather that League dies a slow but steady death, or that League will simply cease to exist at a predetermined time, but, for example, you'll get like a year's notice? So it's like, you know what? We've had a great run, but the servers are going offline in after Worlds 2027. Or that it just, steadily rolls downhill for like the next sort of 10 years or so, and then just eventually fades into nothingness.
I think I would rather the steady decline, if only because I look at things like StarCraft, which were kind of the League of Legends before League of Legends, right? The great esport of the prior age. And they still hold on to a kind of skeleton server crew with a decent player base and stuff. And my read on League is I think it's probably too big to ever completely disappear, at least within the next 5 to 10 years, right? And I think it might end up in a StarCraft scenario where maybe it's not as dominant as it is right now. And I think there's a fair number of signs on the wall that suggest that League, at the very least, is going to have to go through a bit of a metamorphosis. It's not as simple or attractive for new players to pick up or engage with, either as an esport or as a game. And I think a lot of issues with client onboarding have been a long-running struggle that Riot have just not put the resources in to invest in until next year, and we'll see whether that is too little and too late. And really, it should have been paired with something like Arcane, would have been the easy slam dunk. But all of that wrapped around basically says, I think I would rather see the slow decline, partly because I think I've seen it work before with things like StarCraft, which still have a very modest but reliable player base and a solid competitive scene, even if it is more of a B-tier esport these days than the once prestige tournament that it used to be. With some asides on terms of Riot, come on guys, you can still turn this around if you just invest in maybe doing things like making the onboarding even remotely better.
I mean, I think that has always been the biggest thing, at least for the last, 6 or 7 years. I think that's been the biggest gateway. What do you think, Nymaera? What are your thoughts?
I'm gonna be sitting here playing like an ARAM a week until the day I die. It's gonna be a slow decline. I'm gonna be sat there. I'm gonna be like, you know what? I feel like locking in like Quinn's hot lane today to just ruin some poor person's day. To lock in to just play like a single arena, relive my days of being rank 1 in Europe in arena. Gonna tell my kids and my grandkids about it. I think I'd always take the slow decline. There's just too much of my life that's been put into this now. I think if it just suddenly exploded and just disappeared, it would feel like a genuine huge chunk of my life has just gone. The slow decline, I can kind of accept that because it ramping down but still being present for me to just dip my toes in every now, which is kind of what I do anyway. That's exactly what I do.
It's almost like that relationship paradox of, if you're together with someone for like 5 years and then it suddenly ends, is that wasted time? Did you put your energy into something that...
Don't bring this
life
Tens and
learning.
Kaide drama into here. Leave that alone.
If that
Why
is
would
an
you say
anime, I am appalled that that's what we've reached for as that point of comparison, rather than, I believe many a philosopher have discussed.
No, that's two streamers, Rich.
Oh, sorry.
huge
that went
streamers,
straight
Tens.
over my head. That
That's
went
like
straight
the
over
huge
my head.
streamer drama. I say drama. It's the huge streamer thing of the week.
event.
Or one of,
Yeah.
okay, one of two huge streamer things during the week. The other one will not be mentioned.
Yeah, all I was like, because I did actually glance something to do with this on my timeline at some point. It was just like he stayed with her through cancer, and this is how she repays him or something. I was like, I'm not looking
Ridiculous.
at any deeper into this. But no, that's not where I was going with it. But yeah, no, I personally, obviously devil's into the detail, but I would actually rather I just had like, let's say 2 years notice, and it's like it's gonna die then, because also you can just sort of plan. You're less like, I mean. Sam made a great case of, it's not too late, right? I can still turn it around or whatever. You could go in with that mindset for the next 5 years of slow decline, still clutching on to the hope that at some point it will U-turn. Whereas if it's like, I have a definitive point in time where the fingers will be snapped and the servers just cease to exist. It's like, okay, well, I had all my ducks in order to move on well ahead of time with the knowledge that was no longer a thing. So yeah, I'd take the horse out the back and shoot it, I guess. Metaphorically speaking, of course. I would never, ever do such a thing to a poor animal. Not even a glue factory vibe. I wouldn't go there. Anyway, moving on.
What's the guy from the American of Mice and Men say? Tell him about the lambs, Georgie, or whatever.
Yes, we're all going to a farm one way or another at some point, League of Legends included. Anyway, regardless, let's talk about some teams who are off to the glue factory early, unfortunately, in part because of, let's be frank, the very unsatisfactory conclusion to a format which had question marks ahead of time, and I feel almost has more question marks now because basically we got the worst possible scenario. Just to lay this out for people who may not have realized just how crazy the situation is. The difference between 4th place in the LEC and 10th place was a single game, in part because there are a whole bunch of teams with 5 wins and there are no tiebreakers. Now, we understand the logistics of tiebreakers and, it can take forever and you have to have multiple tiebreaking metrics within the tiebreaker. Otherwise, you could play for infinity, essentially. But I think what is probably fairly uncontroversial to say is if you can get those tiebreaker games out, there's not really much controversy about who gets in and who doesn't. Like, it feels fair, even if it is a bit of a logistical nightmare. I think the big issue that a lot of people have, that we'll sort of get into now, is that this doesn't really feel fair or satisfactory. It just feels a little bit random. Now, obviously, they do use tie-breaking metrics to decide, which of the 5-win teams goes in and out, but it doesn't feel great, particularly when you have a team like Los Ratones, who had such a poor start to the season, but were trending so well in an upwards direction and went on their own sort of mini miracle run, if you want to call it that, to look like one of the better teams towards the end of the season, who are now just out based on an arbitrary tie-breaking metric. So, Sam, I want to get your thoughts on this, I guess, holistically at first, before we get into the specifics of the teams.
So, in some ways, it's the most LR thing that could possibly happen. Like, it is the most ridiculous ending to a ridiculous journey. And it is so frustrating in, like, the manner in which it happened as well. Again, the start wasn't great. All the memes came through, like, these guys just can't play at this level. All the flaws they have in the early game are being exploited now at the LEC level. They can't turn around these big deficits like they could at ERL. And then actually, a week away, some time to fix things, and actually they turned it around in a really, really impressive way. Baus kind of got his feet under him, which was a huge deal for the team to kind of have that kind of presence again. Nemesis was looking dangerous again. He was genuinely very, very good on like choice picks like the Rise. And then for them to basically get a lead and then fumble it was just bloody ridiculous. As for the format stuff, I have always had issues with tiebreakers being decided by arbitrary values about what makes good League of Legends. My personal pet peeve is any tiebreaker being decided by things like game time, because that completely invalidates any comp that wants to scale.
Yep.
What do you mean that Kayle is now not actually as worthy as, I don't know, Draven? Like, that feels so foolish to me. It's like, just winning fast doesn't necessarily make you better at League of Legends.
That's
it makes you better at playing early snowball comps.
Literally
By
And
the
I
way,
completely disagree with that as a metric.
This actually reminds me of something that happened to Sam and I over the Christmas period, because we went to go play some Commander at a local like games card shop of us, and Sam has this one deck which like sacrifice. He's got a Lord of the Nazgul, Lord of the Rings MTG deck, and the whole thing is like we only had like how many minutes was it per round, Sam? Like
30.
30 minutes. And if for those of you who haven't played Commander, like everyone's got 100 cards, and just like it's not long enough to play an actual game. Sam and I played a 2-man Commander game that lasted like 2 hours. So if you're playing a deck which is just fundamentally not playing towards the format which you're setting, or in this case, playing a game or whatever like that, it just feels kind of shit. Now, in terms of the tiebreakers for this one, though, I don't think it was determined by game time, though, was it?
No,
I thought it was by...
what were the tiebreaker
I thought it was
rules again?
I thought it was head-to-head in the tiebreaker.
Yes.
So in this one, it was they lost against Fnatic, who were the other team tied at that score, even though LR did end up winning against better teams like G2 and MKOI and blah, blah, blah.
Which is, yes. So, like, again, and then, as I said, like, I've always had these issues with some of these tiebreaker metrics, because basically the end result is if people are at the same game score, if it isn't a 2-0 head-to-head against the direct opposition, which you don't have because it's basically a single round robin, you should be playing a tiebreaker game. There should have been games today, and maybe you do them online to save on studio costs, whatever it takes. Maybe you don't broadcast them properly, you just throw a clean feed out, and let co-streamers do their thing for this day only or whatever. But realistically, there should have been an actual tiebreaker scenario. And again, I just brought the game time on because it's a personal pet peeve. No. But again, similarly with head-to-head, like that's not really a true metric. That is one game when we don't have best of threes. Like even if it was a best of 3, then you can have a bit more justification because it's better than just the one game. And especially it's like, yo, you played Fnatic. I don't know, when did LR play Fnatic? Was it right back towards the beginning of the split? Week 1.
Game 1. It was their first game actually.
Yeah,
and then the second game was KCB, which they lost. Yeah.
Which again, that is so unsatisfying as a way for it to go. Like, don't get me wrong, the drama of the day was great with so many opportunities for LR to make it off other people's results. But I know Vladdy said in an interview, Al was chatting to me about it early in the day, saying actually Vladdy was saying, you know what, actually I'm not sure we were supposed to be in playoffs here. I don't think we deserved it. And there's some truth in that, actually. If you look at the teams that made playoffs, what you kind of go, actually, is this the teams I wanted to see there? Realistically, of recent form? No. And when actually the games are so bloody tight, like, I know it was obviously like one game between 4th and 10th. It's 2 games difference between 2nd and 10th. You know, and it really was incredibly tight.
By the way, like, I think it is literally only the Fnatic and playoffs thing which I take issue with. Like, I think all the other teams did battle it through there. It is literally just Lost Returns probably deserved it more than Fnatic towards the end of it.
Yeah, and the thing
and
is,
it sucks because like the Lost Returns lost versus KCB, the team which like pretty much everyone else beat, which just sucks.
But then as you said, I mean I agree with Sam's general point of like the arbitrary nature of it and the fact that it's like you lost Fnatic, but you beat the team that beat Fnatic, and it's like in a weird way, isn't that more impressive? You know, like it does seem. I mean, we know why they do it. It's a time saver. It saves costs. It's logistically easier, etc. But it does leave a pretty sour taste in the mouth. And I bet Riot, to a certain extent, are kicking themselves because basically LR are out of LEC for these completely arbitrary reasons. So what's your thoughts?
Speaking of the cost there, though. Well, speaking of the cost of it, right? So basically what it is because you're playing so many games back to back, you've got 6 best of ones. You only have so much time to do them in. You don't want to run tiebreakers at the end of the day, especially in scenarios where you'd have multiple tiebreakers. So LEC basically said, right, we've had this rule for years where if you are tied across the playoffs margin, you will play tiebreakers. They've had that since 23? 24? They've had that for a while, where you always play tiebreakers over the playoffs margin, over the divider between them. So if there's a tie between like 6th and 8th or blah blah blah, you will always end up playing those tiebreakers. And this year they took it out. Now I would imagine that is because they don't want to have an extra broadcast day. So we talked about this before, and I've talked about this on different podcasts too. But effectively, to me, it seems as though LEC is probably cost cutting on broadcast. Is always something which they look to do, right? Because it bleeds money. Now, broadcast is very expensive, folks. So while I have my issues with it, I think it is worth investing in the broadcast. The truth of the matter is, pragmatically, it costs them a ton. Opening a studio for a day will cost, I would say, 40,000 euros, maybe.
Easy.
Because you have to have everyone's salaries for security, for catering, for camera crew, for hospitality. All of them have to be paid. You then have to have all of the electrical costs, which is obviously very high for studio lighting and giant LED screens and blah, blah, blah. You add up everything, and you end up paying a lot of money for a single day of games. However, in this case, if it had been the case where you'd have a tiebreaker late on a different day and Lost Returns won, I reckon they would have made that money back by quite a lot, because you would have had hundreds of thousands. You would have, over the course of playoffs, if they'd stayed in for like several rounds, millions of extra views, millions. They would have absolutely made up their money that they lost on that. Pragmatically, I understand why the rule change happened from a cost standpoint. Competitively, and in terms of someone who enjoys good League of Legends and good broadcast, I don't like it. So I'm trying to separate those two thoughts out, and hopefully you can understand where that separation comes from. But I'm sure they're just sat there like, oh, fuck me, we have just completely bottled it. And you understand, that they don't want to have tiebreakers XYZ, but it felt deeply, deeply unsatisfying to have it end like that, particularly because I think we are now going to see worse League of Legends and less entertaining storylines in League of Legends than would have otherwise been. Again, I somewhat understand why the tiebreak. The teams knew what they were up against in terms of the rules. In fact, I was just on Power Spike talking about the NA format, because they've had a weird situation with their Swiss format, where FlyQuest came out third, not second, because of opponent win percentage. And basically, I was going back and forth with Yamato and Jamada about this, and my stance is effectively like you knew the rules going into it. Reality is like you can't change that in retrospect. It fucking sucks, but you can't change that in retrospect. And yeah, it kind of sucks to just have to view things off the eye test and say, off the eye test, this team would have been better, because that's no way to run a format. You can't do a format based off the eye test. The whole point is you got rules which you play within. And it sucks for Lost Returns, because this was what they had 96% chance to get in, and then went down to a 91%, and then they still lost. That is just fucking killer. That is just awful. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I wouldn't, especially after all the animosity which was thrown at them from other fan bases and whatever, which I don't think was entirely their fault. Yeah, they chatted some shit. Every team's demand, they're allowed that to a certain extent. And when they started going 0-3 or 0-4 or whatever, yeah, they deserve to have shit talked back to them. But yeah, after all the pressure that was put on them, for it to end like that, I literally would not wish that upon like my worst enemy. That is one of the worst ways to go out.
Yeah,
I think the frustrating thing for me on that one as well is just the fact that they had it in their hands. That last game that would have just locked it for themselves, no other win conditions required. They had everything to play with. They had a great scaling comp with Velia for the first time in a wonderful position. Like, Baus got his Scion, for God's sake. Like, everything was done. They had everything. Hell, they wouldn't even have to play from a deficit. They were in the bloody lead. And that was a rarity at the best of times. Like, they weren't a very consistent early game team, even at ERL level, right? Like, for all actually sometimes the stats said they were okay early. We all saw the fumbles. We all saw that was the weakest part of their game. To throw it in such a manner has got to be extra galling, right? Because realistically, that was their game.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, might be a good time to talk about some of those moments. Guys, I believe we have a couple of clips.
We have
here.
a couple. Sure. So, well, there's a bunch of places where this can start at. The clip I've actually chosen at first happens quite late into the game, but I wanted to talk about through this clip, which for audio-only listeners, this happens at 28 minutes into Lost Ratones versus Vitality. There's a slim gold lead for Lost Ratones. Baron is available, and they do have a dragon lead. It's looking pretty good. And I wanted to show how I really think that Baus, despite getting the Scion, really struggled to know how to frontline in this composition. So basically what happens is we're kind of sat in the mid lane. Ult goes onto Kazi, use the Ghost Blade to get out of the way. And I just want you to look at how Baus ends up positioning just after this point, because the carries kind of like all stretch over this way, and then Baus just doesn't know where to stand. And he's in this kind of one small corridor here, like, well, I really want to be like kind of over here. I want to be over here somewhere. And so he's trying to hang out there without realizing that actually he's just too far from his team. Look at the distance between here. This is not where you want the front line. There's a kind of a concept in League of Legends, which is largely known as like front line to back line spacing, which is if you're a carry, how close are you to your front line? And that will change depending on the enemy composition. Against someone like a Bard, you don't want to be stood just behind your front line because you can get queued. Same with something with like follow-through damage, like Aphelios Infernum or something like that. You know, there is different things, right, which can occasionally hit you through that. And then he just doesn't realize how far he is. And as he gets scooped up here, LR just realized, oh shit, we can't do anything. And even though he has the ult out, he can't do anything. There's a punch of CC, and LR just are way too slow to react to it because they're too far out of position. And this was something which was really really problematic for me, actually, because this is obviously after, like, Crownie had his oopsie a little further back. Where did that happen? That happened a while ago, so I'd have to go find that somewhere else. But I thought this was a really good clip and quite a slow moment, in quite a short moment to show, actually, I don't think LR knew how to stand behind their front line, and I don't think Baus did a very good job of frontlining either. The team clearly didn't know where to stand. So that's one clip. We can keep yapping in case there's another clip you want to talk about.
Well, not from me,
Sam,
but
anything?
if Sam has something.
For this section, I mean, what clips have you got rolling? Because obviously this game was so frustrating to watch again, as you called out. Like, actually, we know what Baus can be like in terms of like his ability to play out the Sion, but again, it wasn't a great option to find those fights. I think you articulated that really well. I was pretty excited then to sort of see, well, okay, well, this is an unfortunate game, but there's still so many other games that could send LR in and make the rest of the day super exciting. And then there were some very, very unfortunate fumbles with, I suspect if this is the one we're talking about here, with, actually, it's not the player that's one thinking, but that's absolutely fine. But yeah, there is some unfortunate, shall we say?
Because okay, so I talked about that Baus one, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit before, because realistically, LR had a really good start, and then Crownie, like if you look at this point on the map, you have Bard recalling jungle, and you've got bot lane pushed up. You think you're, I guess, okay, but Valia's back in base, and we used to call this the Crownie oopsie, which, again, for audio listeners, this is actually backtracking to 20 minutes in, and Crownie is really far ahead. He's done very well, actually, getting ahead of the bot lane. Flashy had a very poor laning phase. There's just no one on his screen. It's just an easy Pantheon not in. If a Corki with Flash can get caught, you are well out of position. Yeah. Like, well out of position. And Crownie's had a couple of these moments across this regular split. And it's just so sad to see, that resurface here. Baus was dying in sidelines, whatever. I think most of them were high value. And then I suppose the last play, which I want to talk about as well, because I think there are really 3 plays which define this game in the negative.
Yes.
And then there's this play right at the end, which is the play which ends the game effectively. So this is right at the base, where we're looking at effectively a series of misplays where, everything up until I think this point, or just beyond this point, is fine. Nemesis ends up missing the ult, whatever. Humanoid largely outplays, goes golden. And then, again, this is all fine. They get summoners out of Humanoid. This is important. I think this is just back and forth. The problem here is this going over the wall here. This going over the wall is just insanity to me. You have this coming up in 5 seconds. Yes, you have the Mountain Soul. That is good for you. You definitely have some ability to play through this. But you're going on to Narco, who's got ult again anyway, and he has Oranguins. You're going up against Kazi, you don't get the spell shield there, and then he E's under turret. Because I think what he's trying to do is if you watch here, I think he ends up... No, he doesn't even react to something. I thought initially when I watched this live that he was reacting to Kazi trying to ult him. I mean, he's trying to ignore some CC and stop him from insta-dying, but he ends up Eing under turret, and the rest of the team is like, oh, bugger, that's really bad. Kazi hits an ult behind him as well, and the game just falls apart from here. Reckless, I think, splits... I mean, he has to split that way, I suppose, but he ends up like... It's just... I've hit the wrong keybind. But yeah, I think these 3 plays are the ones which stood out for me in the Vitality game, where, first off, it was Crownie dying in mid lane, then it was Baus... not playing the front line well. There are a couple of other Baus moments as well, which you could highlight from him not frontlining very well. I think that he didn't really deal with the Mundo blocking his ultimates very well, which was very surprising to me, because even when people have had tools against him before, it's felt like he's managed to work it out. And then, of course, this play in the base from Nemesis as well. It's kind of a full team effort to throw this game from a lead. You have a Mountain Soul on a bunch of very, very fed people. And this is where I think the real heartbreak comes in, because, as Sam was saying, like, this is just not typical. Velia has his best game of the split. Great, that's been one of their biggest problems. Typically, LR have been very, very good at like playing through late game. Yeah. And they throw the one time they have a lead going into the late game, they throw it.
Yeah, I mean,
going from the early game.
I think that to me, having all of this being said, I do think it's kind of sad, as I said, basically because of the format, that they went into this game having to win it. Or to me, like, it might sound weird. It might even sound like I'm almost like, super.
Well, they didn't have to win it at first.
Well, no, sure, but like it might sound like some, LR copium fandom or something. But the run that they were on and the amount of games that they'd racked up, and the fact that they were in the mix with teams all the way up to like almost 4th place or whatever, it felt unreasonable going into this game that they might have to win it. Like, that already felt like wrong to me.
They've done all the work needed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and you can say, well, the league table never lies, whatever. Generally speaking, sure. Like, if a team simply has more wins than another team, then ultimately they deserved it over the course of the season. You can argue, but that wasn't the case here. There were literally most of the teams in the league were tied or close to being tied. So it just felt so unsatisfying on so many different levels. And as you guys pointed out, to sort of bring it full circle in terms of the whole like studio discussion and why the tiebreakers didn't happen, I think something that's worth mentioning as well, which, this isn't confirmed, this is largely rumor mill or whatever, there is a suggestion that LEC, we've been seeing all the cutbacks they've been making on the broadcast, and there is a serious suggestion that the league actually might just go fully online next year, with road shows and whatever and stuff in playoffs. But there are strong rumors that actually everything might just simply be online. And by the way, I'm not necessarily too against that, but I understand this is a very personal preference thing. Personally, unless you have like a full-on proper roadshow thing, as a viewer who is not there physically in person, I don't get that much from it being in a studio and 25 people in the audience clapping. Also worth noting that those people in the audience pay very little money to be there and basically don't cover any of the production costs. So anyone thinking, oh, are they
It's
sell
like
tickets?
15 euros a ticket.
Yeah, it's like
it's
they
not
make
expensive.
nothing back. Unironically, they probably make like 1% back or something from the ticket. Like, the tickets are just, it's nothing. And the thing is, if you increase the price, instead of 25 people, you'd have 7 people. So it's like there's no getting around that situation.
It's worth noting that tickets generally sell out. The question is actually then, well, do people turn up despite getting the tickets? And it's one of those things. The tickets do tend to go. Teams tend to take a fair chunk of them, though, and people sometimes only turn up for some games. It's a very long day, etc., etc., etc. So you don't necessarily get people there for the whole day as part of it. Not everyone who gets a ticket turns up, and the problem is when, say, 20% of people who have tickets don't get them. You've got 20% of tickets go to teams who then maybe don't have that go, or some go to sponsors, that kind of thing. And actually you end up with an audience that's half full or turn up only for their team's games, etc. And then actually they're out getting their pictures with their team afterwards, etc., etc., or doing fan meet things. The amount of people in the audience at any given time is not as high as you might like. And that's part of the deal. And again, you don't have the CS scenario, right, where they have a lot of online qualifiers and stuff and online play until you turn up to the big majors and tournaments, when everyone then turns up to Cologne or Katowice or whatever, and then you play that big stadium environment and get the hype then with what's on microphone there, which is quite cool. But yes, I somewhat see the thought process there, and that might be the way things are going, though I grant you that might be, how do I put this, I don't want to say embarrassing per se, but I can see how Riot might struggle to spin that in a positive light in terms of, look at us moving forwards.
Oh yeah.
We watched them with the LPL being like, we're going to a co-streamer led model to really bring they can spin it like that, which obviously they'll give it a good shot.
But I mean, the thing, I would genuinely be interested to hear, like, in the comments, like, how people feel about the broadcast and stuff in general. Because for me, like, call me a purist or whatever, I really only care about watching the games. I do think good casting can add, obviously, quite a bit to games. But
unbiased opinion here, but yes.
Yeah, I don't really care where the caster is based unless it impacts their performance, which obviously it could well do. But so far as I'm getting, like, decent casting and I'm getting the games themselves, I don't really care if it's in epoxy little studio or not. As I said, roadshow's a bit different. I think if you get the full ambiance and crowd noise and whatever of a proper roadshow, cool, awesome. And I do believe, again, this is rumor, this is not, anything hard evidence or whatever. I believe, if anything, they will slightly increase roadshows with the main chunk of regular season being online and then probably the roadshow stuff being more playoff focused. But for me personally, I don't care. To me, that's not a win or a loss. I just don't care. But I would be interested to know if like the average viewer actually gets anything out of the fact that it's in a studio, or you wouldn't give a toss if it was online or not.
I think COVID era removed the kind of the momentum which live esports events were getting for a long time, actually. I think you go back to like the Athens final and like the Madrid finals and some of the other ones which were really, really well received. I think that the LEC for a long time has not been catering well enough to live audiences across the breadth of Europe. It's been catering to Germany and that's fine. And I think that Munich was a good show. I think that they've had good finals there, but realistically, it should have been to Paris, to Madrid. God, we haven't been to London since 2014 for the LEC. I know that they've had international events there, but LEC viewers haven't had their show there, or anywhere else in the UK, actually. I mean, we had a Mere Masters in Leicester for a little while. But anyway, there's a bunch of different places. These are just some suggestions, right? And I think that, yeah, I mean, if the rumors which you're saying there do hold any weight or whatever, and it does go to more road shows, I actually think there's a positive there in terms of it. I don't think they have to be huge road shows, folks. I think you can have road shows for a couple hundred people, and I think you can make that
It'll be
work.
still good fun. Yeah.
I think actually having intimate venues like that are fine. And while some people are like, oh, you know, this setup is XYZ, and like this venue is kind of shit or whatever, and you'll have to rebuild the skills to hold shows like that, I think even small road shows can have that really kind of like exclusive kind of draw to it then at that point. But like, I was at this venue with only like a couple of hundred people.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want some examples, I don't know how many people here are going to have crossover into other esports like FGC, but I have some really good friends with Tasty Steve. Shout out there. Does a lot of like Street Fighter, Tekken tournaments. Great commentator and a really cool dude who sort of gave me my love for watching those games in a lot of ways. But he was doing Red Bull Gaming Sphere in London. And again, that's 100 people in there. It was a great time. It was a great time watching that kind of show. You can absolutely make those things work. Again, scale and prestige are often tied together, and I do get that for the biggest league broadcast in EU, when you are seeing things like Core X and stuff sell up these crazy venues and the league of their own with that kind of crazy pull, you want that on a regular basis.
Venue.
And I do see that being quite a big deal. Actually, if you can't do that, what does that look like? And obviously, then again, it's sort of things like part of the deal with the Riot Studios, actually, then we can have these weekly tournaments in this cool venue that's ours that we can do all these things with. But actually, they don't want to do that much there anymore. They aren't doing a lot of in-house content in the same way they used to.
Yeah.
They've got all these kind of additional content rooms, and we're not getting
Even
Universe,
stuff like
not
Euphoria
Universe,
is gone now, right?
Euphoria.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Universe is the ERL podcast and stuff that does a Mere Masters, but you know what I mean. That or a lot of the crazy skit content's not being done. That actually they had this studio partly built to help set up that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it shares time with Valorant, all that kind of thing, but you've got all this space to do content stuff, and it's not there. You've got Striker set up to do that. You're not really using that much there at the minute either, for all it is a sort of broadcast hub for other stuff as well. But that's really frustrating to have this space to do something quite creative and cool with, and they don't want to put the budget towards it, which I think in the end result is to the diminishment of the esport, to the diminishment of the scene. And actually, you've got a lot of very impressive talent, a lot of really cool players, a lot of really cool personalities. Getting Yamato in for a segment, getting some of these LR players to come in, getting the co-streamers to come in and chat on these kind of things, getting the players out there. And I do get that locking in players is and will continue to be a challenging process. Like a lot of players are, particularly if they're struggling on big teams, aren't that invested in getting their names out there and speaking mid tumultuous time in the LEC or whatever. But you had this golden opportunity, I think, to really push some stuff beyond the game, to grow those personalities and stuff and get that into the show rather than it just being part of the opening 20 minutes or whatever. And I don't think that has articulated as well as it could be. And if we are moving to an online space, I think that's going to get harder to do.
Well, it is worth noting on that note in terms of getting players on broadcast. People have pussyfooted around it a fair bit. Folks, if you don't see players on content or on a broadcast, it's because they or the teams have turned it down.
Yeah.
If there's a caster on a segment, grand majority of the time it's because they wanted a player and they couldn't get them. And I think that the community went way overboard for 1 or 2 years, particularly in the COVID years as well, and when we were just coming out of it, saying like, well, why are there casters everywhere? And they got really sick of them because they were saturated with casters everywhere. It's because no one would fucking say yes, or there was a problem or scheduling issues. It's not always a malicious thing, but realistically, the casters are kind of like, I mean, when I was on in 2022, I was on a lot of content basically because I was free on the day and someone else had to drop out, and I was on probably
I got
about,
for the same reason.
Sam got in for the same reason, but I was probably on like 5 or 6 content pieces across that year. Now imagine if that happens to me. Imagine what you could have seen. Your Perkses, your Alfaris, your Yankoses, blah blah blah, whoever you want, right? They could have been on those segments. And now obviously we're in the situation too where the assumed power of the main broadcast has gone down as well. Now people would prefer to be on the co-streams actually rather than the main broadcast. They'll go and say hi to them too. And what Sam's saying about maybe missed opportunities, I definitely understand that too. But I do do also think that realistically, and it will get harder, and it will get harder to get contact with those players and show their personalities and get particularly new faces on screen if they haven't got their own streaming persona and whatever. Particularly if someone's just a good player, which is at the end of the day what you should be as a League of Legends pro. If things do, move more towards road shows for special events, and that means that particularly lower tier players, which might have had a personality otherwise shown on stream, might end up getting hit if, as Rich was saying, online format kind of takes place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing to note as well is, again, it's not about what's your cup of tea or not necessarily. That's like almost a separate thing from how viable is the product. None of this stuff was up my street at all. Like stuff like the rap battles, whatever, I didn't even click on them. I didn't care. But the reality is they got very high engagement, lots of viewership, lots of people enjoyed them.
So
yeah, exactly.
I thought it was great.
Lots of people enjoyed them. So all that kind of stuff, which also a lot of people who have now, I don't want to say like fallen out of favor, but maybe we're not as enthusiastic about them doing their day job. A lot of that I think is also placebo, that it's like, oh, well, maybe I don't like Dracos as much as I used to. It's like, do you actually not like his casting as much? Or is it, oh, Dracos used to be one of the first people on the team sheet, to do all the rap battle stuff and all the music stuff with Betty and stuff like that. So I think that, as you guys say, they did assume the roles a lot of the time that players wouldn't, but they also managed to build up their own brand and the LEC's brand as well by taking part in that style of content. And again, it wasn't for me, but it was for a lot of other people.
It's one of the hugest selling points for it. 2019, 2020, for people fucking love that shit.
It was big. And it's one of the few things that transcended the space a little bit, because people that I knew, even personally, who didn't follow the scene at all, were like, oh, this is really cool. This video game, whatever, like producing these really high production music videos and stuff. Like, yeah, no, it's like, again,
it was cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Before we do move on from Los Ratones, to bring it back full circle, we do have to address the rather large elephant in the room of course, the KC situation. Now, for those
for God's sake,
who didn't, follow it completely afterwards, again, like me, maybe you just watched the games and not really too much afterwards. But if you did go on Twitter or anything like that, you'll have basically seen that one of the conditions or possible conditions for LR getting through would have been helped by KC getting their business done against Heretics. Now, obviously, KC were already locked in for first, or I don't know if they were already locked in first at that point, but
yes,
they were.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were locked in for first. The game didn't necessarily mean too much. And we also know that KC was the team who was most vocally against LR's inclusion in this LEC Versus split, which at this point is, all coincidental or doesn't mean too much necessarily. But of course, fuel was very much added to the fire when immediately after the game, Kameto from KC tweeted, well, for us non-French speakers, something that roughly translates to, oh, what a shame we finished first, whatever, it sucks. Basically just saying they're first no matter what. Everyone else can kick rocks, basically. It does. Again, that's my, I guess, translation of the translation. You can be more generous or less generous with it. But yeah, basically, it seemed to be a slightly passive-aggressive hint at the fact that who cares, like, we don't care, we finish first, whatever happened to anyone else, whatever. Now, obviously, if a random fan or someone makes this comment, no skin off there or anyone else's back. But when you are the face of the team that directly impacted someone else qualifying for playoffs, it's not the best look,
especially when there's been animosity in there too. Like, you've got this history of that.
And also, I would say doubled up by the fact that I don't know if this has gone through yet or if he's just announced it. But he's also announced that he is selling. Or is it his partner?
That's Prime selling. So
sorry, one of his partners is selling stock, and Kameto himself has been very vocal about how it's not been financially viable to basically the whole LEC project has not been financially viable for them. So there's lots of like interesting things going on around the scene, let's say, in terms of what's going on at KC, but also coupled with the fact that they were very publicly against LR being there in the first place, coupled with the fact that they basically controlled LR's destiny, and also coupled with the fact that at the start of the split, obviously it was announced that KC Blue was going to be taking part in the league, and they got a free win, essentially, off KC Blue, no matter how you interpret the word free there, but you know what I mean. They comfortably won that game, which meant that this game didn't mean as much, right? Like, if they had lost that game, then actually there would have been a seeding reason at a bare minimum, I believe, for them to want to win this game. So this is a big mess, to put it lightly. But yeah, Nymaera, what are your thoughts on this
Yeah.
whole situation?
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, the Prime selling stock thing, like Prime's been a bit like of an exile from the org anyway, and not well liked
Yeah.
by the KC fan base and Kameto. So I seem to remember that's actually seen as a positive thing by Kameto and like the KC fans, because I don't have full context on that, but I believe that's how it's seen. But yeah, look, folks, obviously there are some people who are out there alleging match fixing. I'm gonna be straight up and say I really, really highly doubt that's the case. However, there is absolutely no reason to draw any suspicion, and in fact, I would have highly suggested completely doing away with any sort of suspicion of that and just make a public statement or whatever, rather than like, from what it seems to us and to other people, basically being like, oh no, we're losing, like clips in game and stuff like that. Obviously, after that point, as he's kind of like laughing as the LR like chain of events happened, I somewhat understand that because you're playing into the drama, and I think most team owners or anyone who's rivals to LR would have been saying so. I say rivals, but people who are like, other org owners which have had that kind of animosity with them. I can understand that part of it, but there's a certain way, the way that he communicated, and just like that just seems like it is an unwise thing to do. Now, do I think there's any water to the allegations? No, I don't think any of these players would throw their
No.
By the
charisma like
way,
that.
it would
Also,
only take
yeah.
one person to come out and say something, and everyone's completely fucked. So the idea that
Yes,
you would
yeah.
risk this is like crazy. And by the
Also,
way,
I-
not to
yeah.
get too into it, but you can apply that to a lot of conspiracies on a much grander scale and question, why things are as they are. Because it just takes
Yeah.
one dissenting voice who has
Yes.
credibility, and the whole thing comes crashing down.
Yeah, but and also to my mind as well, this weird kind of animosity, and I think it's largely from KC directed to LR as well, which I don't think LR really invited this to themselves. I think that's mainly on the co-streamer slash owner part of it, not the player part of it. I think the players are just there to play the fucking game, honestly, as far as I'm aware. Which is crazy again, by the way, because I'm pretty sure that like Cagewell considers Kameto a friend as well too. So all of this stuff is just like, I mean, it's good content, is what it is, but it did seem like it crossed some boundaries there too. But it's just dumb. It's just unwise. Why would you ever even cast suspicion on that kind of thing? Because to me, this is
It
a
invites
continuation.
conversation you didn't need.
It does, and for me, it continues a trend within Europe for the last few years, which just seems like a lot of the fan base is just a fucking spiteful and hate each other, and it's dragging each other down. I actually don't think this builds that much up. I think it just makes people fucking tired of each other and want a distance from it. Like, and I think it just brings everyone down into the mud. And like, to a certain extent, I think you need like that rivalry, but also
Yeah.
on the other side of it, balancing that out, I'm also like, okay, why are we just being shit to each other like this for no good reason? Do it for good reasons, for tangible reasons,
I love
just-
it, by the
there's
way.
some-
I'm just going to put it out
yeah.
there. I actually really like it. Just apart from anything else, I think this is something, one of the things that you could argue would damage the league if it went fully online or whatever, although I think it actually makes no difference, is I think we have always had a distinct lack of storylines. I think one of the things with LR coming in, it wasn't just, oh, it's Cagewell's org, they're coming from EUM, like we haven't seen this kind of crossover for a while. It was also because Reckless is coming back and now he's playing support. It's Nemesis has had lots of things to say about professional league, and now he's going to be playing professional league
Yeah.
again. Like all
Baus
these
shit talking all the top players in LEC.
yeah, like
And his unique play style, he plays so differently to everyone else.
yeah, it's like a lot of really interesting storylines that they just automatically bring, but I actually don't think that generally players are bringing storylines with their voices. This is just like things that have happened. Reckless used to play on Fnatic, so when he plays against Fnatic, that is somewhat interesting. But it's not like Reckless goes on a bunch of podcasts and has things to say. Like, he doesn't. So these are almost storylines that, as a community, we are creating, like, our own headcanon of, like, I bet Reckless really hates Fnatic because he did this or they did... Like, these aren't even necessarily things that have been spoken about publicly too much. So, for me, I always like it when people do just basically stir the shit publicly, because I'm like, cool, more things to read, more reactions to see, more things to talk about, indeed, on shows like this, because I do think we severely lack that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying, we should always support pure drama slop or whatever, but there's something here that's tangible, which has legs, which is the whole conversation about how ethical was it that Riot gave LR any kind of LEC slot. And to me, that's what makes this interesting. It's not just mindless, like, haha, your mum, like playground insults.
Yeah.
It's like, so there's actual real stakes, real financial implications around this stuff. So yeah, to me, that's interesting. But yeah, Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
So I've probably got two lines on this. So the first one is, again, I very much doubt there was match fixing. I think it's very unlikely. There's a very good tweet chain from Peter Dunn that I think is quite articulate on this, which basically says, look, if you do match fix, it's such a dumb idea. One, because we've seen it happen over, say, an LPL, but that was more around betting stuff than this. And players are just gone forever. Like, you ruin your career forever for what will amount to a month of potential benefit, if that. Also, players and teams and orgs and coaches will hold grudges. They will hold grudges. They will know. They will know what has happened. And eventually you'll move on to the roster carousels, move around, and certain teams and players will just refuse to work with you because they know that actually you cannot be trusted. And it's the reason, like, actually, again, a lot of that drama last year with all of that KC stuff coming out from behind the coach team with the coaching staff, that wasn't anything to do with match fixing, obviously, but it was that kind of thing that puts a black mark against your name. And in esports, where bluntly, however good you are, largely you're replaceable unless your name is someone like Caps. And even then, you look at someone like a Yankos, right? And eventually he was replaceable too, right? He's had to go to co-stream. He never really found a top tier team to go play with again afterwards. You're just done. So the risk of like basically cursing your career for this, when actually the players just want to win and play, really, is very unlikely on that front. As for the format issues in terms of bringing up ERL teams to LEC for a split, there are a couple issues, and I think they will have been gone over a lot, but it probably is worth hashing again. Now we're kind of towards the end of it. KCB and LR are no longer going to be in this tournament. They both didn't make playoffs. There were two major issues, really, weren't there? One that basically a lot of the LEC teams went, wait, what do you mean these guys are coming up and we have no say over this? Well, it's not LEC anymore, it's LEC Versus, so it's a whole new thing, so actually your say over this doesn't matter. And that ruffled some feathers, understandably. So, okay, well, that's problematic in terms of our ability to justify the value of these slots and our ability to have say in the league and all this other stuff. But Riot put themselves in a bind where basically, or were in a bind, where effectively Lost Returns said, well, not to put too fine a point in it, this project's kind of run its course. We did the league of its own thing. We did the ERL thing. We proved we could do it. If we don't get LEC, honestly, yeah, I think we're kind of done. This is a good point to close the door. And Riot went, well, damn, we want to get as much value out of this as we can. How do we get you guys in here? And they kind of found a way to make it happen. And they sort of pseudo-justified it by saying, well, the most dominant team across the year in Mere Masters will make it. And that was, at that point, already Lost Returns. And then you have the winner that comes in forwards. And for the record, I have been pro having crossover with the Mere Masters for such a long time. I think the fact that there has been such a disconnect between LEC and ERLs has been a travesty, because one of the fun part of being in Europe is having this huge, wide-ranging set of scenes and fan bases and players and play styles, and the joy of the Mere Masters with that, even if, again, the broadcast value and production and everything else has kind of really dwindled down to like was it 3-4 days of broadcast now for Mere Masters in English, which is tragic, really, considering how cool a lot of those games could and should be.
That's how we met a lot of our starters too. It's a great pipeline for both player and broadcast.
Yeah. So I love the concept of having this in, but the execution was incredibly poor. Partly because it was done on such a short time scale, and partly because they were basically damned if you do, damned if you don't. So it's like, okay, well, we want some ERL crossover, but that's going to enable sister teams. Oh, we kind of tried to get rid of those. So that's going to be a conflict of interest things. Oh, crap. Well, but then we can't not have the winners get on through. Otherwise, actually, what's the point in all of these academy teams that we were trying to convince LEC teams to have? Because actually, otherwise, why on earth would any player ever join an academy team? Because if you ever do anything, you'll never get a slot at the EMEA Master at LEC from this. And there's no promotion relegation, right? So there's no other way in through this. So you end up in this horrible bind where, like, actually you then disincentivize any player or team to get invested in the ERL scene, which is slightly dystopian in that sense, and that really hurts you in that case as well. But then you have to allow conflict of interest, which is really problematic. And the other side of it is, look, because of the timescale over which it's happening, they don't want to have it happen in summer, and they don't want to have it happen in spring, so it has to be in winter. But if you have it happen in winter, then all of the rosters will shift. Those players that were on KCB go, because understandably they're getting better offers to go to LEC or other tier 1 leagues. You can't hold on to those players. So you come into EMEA Masters, or not EMEA Masters, LEC Versus with a completely new roster, in a completely new meta, with completely new set of engagement, like rules of engagement, right? Because the meta is so wildly different. And so actually, what's the point in having these players make it at that point, or this team make it at that point? So it's a half-baked attempt to get the ERL teams in there. And I get why it was done. Like, you wanted to get LR in here while you could to make the most of it. And I've always been pro ERL doing it. But the execution was about as shoddy as it could have been. But I do think that in some ways, right, put themselves in this bind over the course of years, right? Realistically, these format changes should have been discussed a year in advance plus. And realistically, actually, you should have the ERL teams come in summer or in spring if you wanted to make it more competitive. But then you have things like MSI and Worlds being a possibility for these academy teams, these ERL teams. And that is
I mean, I think it
in
was
its own right. So it's
just,
a whole nest of problems.
just a case of striking while the iron was at its absolute hottest,
Yeah.
right? Like LR was
can't
at its,
not, but
at its
yeah.
apex realistically, and they just. I mean, I was always a fan of the concept of like, you know, a cup or something that ran alongside where you take a model from traditional football, for example, where it's like different teams from different divisions all play
FA
the
Cup
early
stuff, yeah.
rounds against each other, and then once you reach the third round or the fourth round or whatever, if you're still in the mix, then you can have matchups where it's LEC teams playing against ERL teams, whatever. I thought that was always a cool concept because you don't devalue or infringe on the concept of LEC teams being LEC teams, but you give an avenue for these teams to sort of play against each other. So for me, I thought that was always interesting. And maybe you even, although I know a lot of people be against this, maybe you even have like an extremely difficult but hypothetically possible path for one of those teams to like qualify for an international somehow. Like, you make it unbelievably difficult, but just to have like this tiny light at the end of a tunnel, which is theoretically possible, in reality will usually be shut down by an LEC team. I thought that was always a more interesting concept than artificially putting a guest team or something into the league. Although I think
10 years ago, I think that would have worked. But I
Yeah.
think the problem is now basically League is so saturated. There's a million games happening every day, and Riot has this has like a rule of thumb where you're not meant to have, particularly because this would have to be a third-party tournament, right? Riot would not run that tournament themselves. It costs too much money. They already handed off kind of production of E-Masters to another company. So I mean, they dropped the broadcast back going into, was it 25 they dropped it, or was it 24? I think they dropped
24,
it.
I think.
24 they dropped the EMEA Masters broadcast, and basically they stopped running it as much in-house. So it was like Webedia that was running it, not Riot in terms of the broadcast. And you can't have, well, this even applied to EMEA Masters, but you can't have multiple tournaments kind of competing with each other. Especially a second tier tournament cannot be playing at the same time as a tier 1 tournament, really, especially within Europe. So that would mean you'd have to have it on separate days. You need to have a third party operator doing it as well. That means that you're probably going to have quite fluctuating performance. That's basically what EMEA Masters was meant to be. And then where do you slot it in related to EMEA Masters? Do you just reform EMEA Masters at that point? How are you going to get the marketing budget for this? Because Riot probably don't want to put Crazy Man into that either, right? So how do you cost effectively run a tournament like that? This is the problem that they're running into. It's like, how do you give a pathway and hope for EMEA Masters? Now, I think effectively the ERLs have run out of gas. You don't have a K-Corp in there now. You don't have an LR in there now. You don't have a Koi on their upswing, because when they were really in there, that was crazy. When KC, that was the team that you had to watch for, and they were crazy, and they were actually a good team as well. There was some hope that they could do something in LEC, and of course, they changed out some rosters, and now the org at least is being quite successful there too. How do you get more gas in the tank for ERLs? I'm actually not sure you can.
I mean,
now.
It wasn't even about, like, you had those flagship teams, but to me, the ERLs, when they were at their peak, it wasn't even about that. It was about having decent amount of investment across the big 3 leagues, right? When LVP, when LFL and Prime League were in their pomp, you had a whole host of teams who were paying very competitive salaries to players who were quasi LEC caliber, and every time you went into EMEA, you're like, how will the top teams from Prime League look against LVP and LFL and so on? And to me, that there was like interest throughout the whole of the ERL scene because players legitimately wanted to play for these teams. Fans,
and it felt like there was a pathway to LEC
Yes,
as well, which is, I
exactly.
think, another
those
thing.
Regional
which has
fan
now...
bases were really engaged, right?
Yeah.
Like, they wanted to be involved with a French scene or a Spanish scene or German scene, like that, or I suppose dark scene, really. Was very competitive. I suspect we may see a devolution of the ERLs back into like an LEC 2-3 and have a more combined
Challenger series, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
basically.
yeah.
I think
no.
we might. I think we're realistically going back that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. And by the way, not necessarily the worst thing that could happen, even though obviously you would rather that it would be in its current state, but way better. But with that not being realistic, the old Challenger scene was good and had very good viewership.
Oh, you competed in it.
Well, yeah, obviously I'm a bit biased, but I mean, you had orgs that took it very seriously.
UOL came from it.
Yeah, HUK, NIP, like you had a lot of orgs that were, I mean, SK started as well in the ERLs. So yeah, I think you could be spot on there. I think that could be in the direction that it's heading in, and it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing because, I mean, we talk about the doom and gloom of like the Western domestic scene to a certain extent, even in China, obviously. But I think the ERLs specifically are suffering as much as anything. I mean, we don't talk about it as much as like the decline of LCS, for example, because it's not a tier 1 league. But realistically, if you look at the absolute prime of the ERLs, which is probably 2018, something like that, maybe 2019.
Somewhere between that.
2018 was the first EU Masters, and that was a big hit. I mean, we had like Origin kind of like make their own super team there. I think you could argue it came later with K Corp. I think you can argue that as well in terms of like there are two ways to do it. You've got the competitive side of it, which is actually you had like Mad Lions Madrid, which were really good for a little while as well. You had a bunch of teams from like 2018 to 2020 around then.
The Excel rosters were pretty good.
Sure,
you had
Nemesis and Self-Made Mad Lions team that won it.
Yeah, sure.
You had lots of,
so from a competitive level, you can view it as that. In a viewership and a kind of like hype level, you probably have to think about like 21, 22 of K Corp, and then you had Heretics and MKOI and stuff like that. That felt like 21, 22, that's where it felt like it really exploded in terms of viewership. And that's when, well, at that point, you actually had like K Corp challenging LEC viewership at that point whilst being outside of it. So while competitively, sure, you can make some arguments like towards earlier years or whatever. I think there are two different parts of that. And now the problem is, I don't think players, well, one, that the salaries have just fallen off a cliff for ERLs. And I think that players don't see a path to LEC through kind of like the clique of LEC friendship groups which want to play together. And, well, bluntly, cronyism / nepotism. To a certain extent, that makes sense, right? You play with people you have good rapport with and you think you can work well with.
Trust to play with, yeah.
There's no promotion relegation, which we talked about the pros and cons of before. I understand it from a financial perspective. But just in terms of the dream of players making it up towards LEC, I think that's taken a hit. And I think that the finances are not there to support playing careers at a tier 2 level. You must be an LEC to support yourself now, basically, I'd imagine.
By the way,
aren't great in tier 2.
On that, what's interesting, I think, and again, this goes to the failings, I think, to what's happened to the scene basically in Europe, is you have, I have clients who are, I would argue, like at least borderline LEC caliber, who have quit League, basically, or at the very least on a break, because it's not worth it. Whereas if you look at a scene like Counter-Strike, these players would be on salary teams, like absolutely. I know it's an open circuit model, so there's less all or nothing element to it. But I mean, I doubt he'd mind me saying, Xerxes is currently not playing League of Legends. He is on a break from League of Legends. It's not worth it.
Shitting me?
It's not worth it. It's just not worth it.
That's after he had a good showing in NOC last year. Like, that was actually really good. Well,
he was good
playing around, right?
Multiple recent EU Masters, and he thought that maybe he had a chance of being picked up by an LEC. He is literally just not playing League right now. I don't want to say he's not playing solo queue or whatever, but he's not on a team. He's not competing. I've heard of to compete on a team right now.
I've heard of some players suggesting to other players, don't play any ERLs because you're going to burn yourself out. Just instead wait for a better offer. Don't grind yourself away, which feels awful in that sense too.
So I think there's two things for me here as well. Like, I've kind of been arguing this for a couple of years now. I think I get why franchising was a thing, and it gave legitimacy and stability for sponsors in particular that did lead to a fairly explosive growth in the scene. But it fell apart with a number of geopolitical situations in the world, wars and crypto crashes, whatever else, that made things very tricky, and COVID and lots of stuff made things very difficult. However, what it did cut was a true route to the LEC. For a while, there was lip service paid to academy teams and ERLs and using that as talent scouting. And to an extent, we saw that. And we saw some teams move up to LEC when they finally earned the right to get there, like Heretics and KC and MKOI, and some of that was just partnering with teams already in the league that wanted to get their way, and that's basically how GiantX became a thing. It's how Movistar Koi became a thing. All these things that happened, and there was some success for a while, but it basically became unsustainable, especially as sponsors started running out of marketing budgets and not seeing enough return for various reasons on the esports adventure, so to speak. And so for me, really, one of the things that would make ERLs a lot more, or a tier 2 scene, whatever that looks like to be, is probably you'd need to move towards something of a Valorant model, where for a couple of the slots are bought back and they become guest slots, which become something that these other teams could play to acquire via a promotion relegation tournament, like you kind of get some extent in Valorant, which I think has largely been pretty successful there to an extent, and would give some ability to move up, because actually it does mean that you don't have that ability for players to go, you know what, I trust in this project, and even if people don't know who I am right now and aren't going to bother picking me up for LEC, either because people think you're washed or kind of just dismissed you, or you're an unknown name, you can still go, you know what, we can just qualify. We'll make it happen. And that's a way of getting in. Even if you don't make it, people still go, ooh, oh, that was close. And that probably is going to be something that I think has to be considered in some various leagues, because it is feeling quite frustrating for up-and-coming players to get into a tier 1 league. It has become a little bit stale, bluntly, and it's very hard and demoralizing for a lot of those players. We're just chatting about Xerxes. It's like, there's no way Xerxes should be giving up. You know, he's more than good enough to at least make a play for it. I get why he's not necessarily there right now, partly because, again, he might be a bit expensive. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true, but people go, I'd rather trust on this academy guy that I vaguely know who we're going to do some work with. And I don't want to say that the LEC players that are in LEC don't deserve to be there. There's a lot of great names. I'm glad to see some of these ERL top lanes have been waiting for a shot for forever to get a shot up there. Tracin, Mainta, Nako from last year, Emperos, these are guys I've been going, you know what, these guys have been worth a shot for a while. But it's taken how long to get there? And it does feel like that because there is one avenue, really, and that is a team going, fine, we'll give you a go, that it is incredibly narrow a win condition and quite bleak, especially when your paycheck at ERL level is very unrewarding and the viewership's not necessarily there and the money's not necessarily there. And you're starting to see teams like Lost Ratones come in and try this kind of like streamer content creation angle. And that's what happened with Valorant to an extent as well. A lot of players became content creators rather than continuing to play professionally, because bluntly, it is a more lucrative and sustainable career where actually you've done 2 years and you're out otherwise. And that can feel quite risky, to say the least, if you're a pro player, especially when it feels like your actual opportunity to even make a tier 1 appearance is so narrow right now.
You know what they need to bring back for sure? I'm not saying they should get a slot or whatever, but if they did a guest slot thing, then one of, like, let's say there's a qualifying tournament, whatever that is, maybe it's EUM gets you, whatever it is.
Yeah.
At some point, one of the teams that needs to be involved has to be, drum roll, whoever is rank 1 in ranked 5s. Bring that shit back, baby.
Oh, it'd be
Let's
so
fucking
good.
go. Let's go.
I mean, that's how Prime
Rank
League works.
5.
You can
Hell
play,
yeah.
you can literally just qualify your way in that way. There's some truth to that. Like, actually, if you can play through the rank ladder, there's some fun with that. And they do it with Dota as well, right?
This has been one of the big, there, of course, it's a real fucking hard sell to orgs and financial stability and blah, blah, blah. But, like, realistically in Europe, particularly, like, that dream of going from solo queue to pro, much in the same way of kind of like going through, like, grassroots football or whatever, there's always, like, even if it's a very slim chance, at least having a door open is... And personally, I'd also like to see how big the difference is between very well organized teams and a flash in the pan solo queue team that can actually make things work on the patch.
But think of the way that content has been trending. Think how well the race to number 1 in ranked 5s would be. It would be so good, and you'd have such a myriad.
I must be able to spectate it.
Yeah, you'd have such a myriad of different kinds of players. You'd have loads of washed LEC players who think, whatever, I'm better than all these like new kids coming up. You'd have random, complete no-names who are hovering near the top. You're like, who the hell are these people? And then a bunch of other people in, who, maybe from the ERL scene who never got what they feel is a fair shout, and suddenly they're dumpstering everyone online. I think that would be so cool for someone to make content out of that.
I completely agree. And I think you miss some of where the grassroots of League and the joy of watching League in the early days came from. And eventually, like, it was cultivated into something else. But the problem is when you don't fertilize the soil under it, eventually what the people you did grow and had that kind of shot maybe disappear, and then there's nothing there to replace it anymore, and that is a little problematic. And again, I think just in general, the esports scene has shifted somewhat, and that realistically means there probably does need to be a bit of a realignment from my eyes anyway, in terms of what that means for paths to pro, what pro looks like, what franchising looks like. And again, I have been pro getting ERL teams some tier 1 access, some way to tier 1 for a while. I've always thought that's something that was missing to some extent, even if you do want the stability.
Yeah, but then you
of
get the
some
cases
franchising
like
for
this
sponsors
LEC
and
Versus
teams, but
thing where you get like a load of teams which don't like it. I understand, because like I understand investing like millions and millions into franchising is gonna ruffle your feathers a little bit when people find an easier way in, because the whole point was it was meant to be exclusive. But times are changing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Something's got to change with it.
But speaking of teams that we will not be seeing again anytime soon, as well as Los Ratones, we also say goodbye to Shifters, who also have 5 wins, by the way. People forget about that. Obviously, they're the secondary storyline at this point, but they also have 5 wins. SK Gaming, who I told you they were going to be crap. They're just bad. They're two. By the way, they're 2.
Hey, I agreed with you. I agreed with you.
Hey, you guys both had them above me on the rankings, so there we go. I think actually they're lower. I've actually overestimated SK. I believe I had them 10th because I had Na'Vi last, which is not aged well. But
then you had KCB, I think, or LR.
KCB,
and then...
yeah, KCB, and then SK, and then LR. I think. I don't know. Anyway, the point is they're out. As are KC Blue, which is not particularly surprising at all. I'm not going to talk about these teams for long, but any sort of thoughts about the teams that are departing us, Nymaera?
I think that Shifters are probably going to explode. I just think the vibes in that team were well off. I actually think this team became way more Paddock-centric than I thought they would be, in terms of if Paddock has, like, agency, this team can do some stuff. I mean, he walked away with a pentakill the other day, right? Saved the game. But when Paddock just doesn't have agency, this guy just runs around like a headless bird,
chicken.
really. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised that bringing in someone like Trimby wouldn't make communication and or leadership in this team a bit better. Like, he was doing an awful lot for previous teams. But I'm surprised that they didn't manage to align in that way. I think that Rooster played pretty well individually. Once again, I actually don't think it's his fault. I think Nuke probably didn't walk away feeling particularly happy about this split, but like they did walk away with a couple of decent victories, right? I'm trying to remember who their biggest scalp was actually, but who was their biggest scalp? I mean, I guess they beat Fnatic.
Close a number of times, particularly early on, where actually there was some good early game leads. And how many times did they throw?
Oh, they beat MKOI was the one. MKOI is the only team I think was notable that they really beat. I mean, Fnatic, I whatever. Yeah, I mean, this team really... I didn't expect a crazy amount from them, but they still... Just how dysfunctional they looked, that was quite depressing for me.
Yeah. And by the way, on that, Sam, I don't know if you saw the comments post Shifter's disappointment that have come from certain corners. I will read, for the viewers who may not be aware, a tweet from previous jungler 113, just in case anyone hasn't seen it.
Don't think I've seen this tweet, actually, so I'm interested.
Oh, hey, here we go. So
even better. Let's go.
Oh, Sam, you're in for a treat.
Yeah, you are in for a treat.
Go on.
So,
all right.
Obviously, Sheep Esports, just tweeting the news, tweeted out, Shifters have been eliminated from LEC playoff contention, yada, yada, yada. 113, quote, retweets it, and puts, who would have guessed, at Striker lol coach. So he's atting his coach Striker, and then says, who would have guessed, Striker, that benching your players for a whole week in scrims before officials, shouting to your players 24/7 in reviews, I think you've been shouting at your players, forcing your players to add LEC players so they leak which champions they play in scrims, was not the key for success. So sad. Blank face emoji. So
also reply to that tweet. Ice, also former AD carry of BDS, was under Shifter's coaching for a while, tweeted, I did it for you.
Yeah.
After knocking them out.
Yeah. And we were actually, talking a little bit about this before the show, saying, for someone who is from Korea, obviously they have a very hierarchical approach to respect, apart from anything else, culturally speaking. The idea, like, if you wanted, obviously we're always speculating, and I'm not gonna, I have no idea to what extent these comments are warranted or not, but I do think it's potentially telling that someone who has grown up in...
Oh, it's not true that they knocked him out, by the way, but he did reply, I did it for you. So.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, wow.
that that someone like Ice would sort of co-sign this tweet is kind of crazy. Like
It's
that
quite
is,
damning, isn't it?
yeah.
Like, I'm not here to say that. How do I put this? People shouting is not necessarily a sign of bad coaching. However, when your players are clearly, that is a long list. That is a laundry list of bad statements and a lot of red flags coming up. And again, none of this is confirmed. I am not in the scrim rooms. I've not seen anything leaked from there. This is not like KC last year where stuff got leaked with evidence. Yeah. This is players putting stuff out there and making claims, and former players who are likely going to be saltier for obvious reasons because they are not playing on that squad anymore. There is a number of caveats to this. That said, even when you're saying, look, sometimes you need to yell at a player or whatever to say, actually get your crap in gear. There's that Maokai moment from a couple of years back where he had to yell at his players mid-game. They turned up the next game and turned it on. But on the whole, a suggestion of, let's say, tyrannical behavior in the scrim room that is demeaning and belittling your players is not what you want to hear about. And especially when actually it looked like across the split, Shift has got more dysfunctional and more distressed. And actually, there was that nuke crash out on Twitter after they lost to Lost Ratones, and there was the Nidalee top, and there was that whole crash out as well. The players' mental states was clearly not great for a variety of reasons.
Right. Isn't BDS a team? Well, now Shifters, but BDS, aren't they like super? Didn't they put a lot of investment into like psychology and like getting like mental support stuff, like the psychology stuff like that in the team as well? I seem to remember I heard that from somewhere.
To be honest, I don't remember with them specifically.
They
like
put a lot of money into
they put a lot of money in general into the
this isn't
crazy.
Their
Realty Academy was ridiculous.
Some teams, BDS Academy put like a ton of investment, but yeah, some LEC teams have really gone in hard on like performance coaches and psychology and stuff like that, and obviously some of that has worked out, some of that hasn't. But I thought BDS were one of the teams which were quite invested in like performance coaching and psychological kind of like support and stuff like that.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for him at all or go into like any details, but obviously Labrov used to be on BDS. He's still a client of mine, and he didn't have. I don't think he really had many negative things to say at all. I think most of his memories are sort of from dealing with Adam from a player perspective and a coaching perspective or whatever, but he never really injected any sort of negativity like, oh, the staff aren't doing this or something like that. Again, I didn't pry too deeply, but it felt like a fairly vanilla vibe in terms of expectations and what he was getting out of the coach and stuff like that. So I mean, this could obviously post date stuff like that. And again,
the success hasn't been there over the last couple of years, whereas even Labrov was there. Actually, they were doing relatively well, right? Even if they didn't get all the way up there, they were still contenders.
So, yeah. And again, obviously,
and that's not the case right now.
He can speak for himself. I only mentioned that just to mention that I wasn't privy to whatever this is that is a supposedly more extreme scenario that's been going on. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, it's obviously not ideal. And one thing I think it was quite interesting, and actually this was a thought that I didn't have with hindsight, I actually had at the time, which is when Nuke was having his sort of Twitter crash out, I was thinking like, who at BDS is like having oversight over this? Like, is anyone talking to him? Like, why is he putting out?
He had a crash out last year too when they weren't making playoffs too, I remember.
But I was thinking
maybe even several last year thinking about it.
That there's no kind of like intervention whatsoever of like,
well, who's team managing here? Exactly. Yeah, like even if there's not a coaching thing, that should be a team manager or a head coach thing where actually there is something about the team atmosphere that is clearly off. And if your former players are writing incendiary tweets like that and backing them up, however much truth there is to them, and I think obviously in terms of the on-stage performance, there were a number of very significant late-game throws from Team Shifters, particularly in early weeks, and things didn't get better. That does not speak highly of a particularly constructive team environment. Again, it's speculation. We don't know, but it's not a good sign.
I don't think a lot of this stuff should be talked about publicly because it opens the door for everyone to fling shit at each other, and I think it just makes everyone look bad, unless it's a safeguarding thing. Now, as far as I'm aware, shouting at players, that's just the thing which happens with coaching to a certain extent. You shouldn't do that without intent. You should not just be flying off the handle at people. Yeah. However, you do need to shake people out of a stupor sometimes. You do need to get, sometimes quite egotistical young young people to take things seriously. And one of the ways you need to know your players very well, because again, I was talking to Yamato about this earlier in the day because he was talking about how Yamato was saying like he's only ever gotten like intentionally angry like on purpose, and he's only done like once or twice in his entire career, and obviously he's been a coach for a very long time, and you have to be very, very mindful of doing that. Personally, I think as well, if you ever do that, you set the precedent that you can do that, and that can be a very dangerous thing. You kind of change the social contract that you have with your players, where if you get angry once, then that changes the dynamic an awful lot. You can cause players to get angry back. You can cause players to completely shut off, completely retreat as well. There are so many ways that this can go wrong. Like there are some players it will work with because, like particularly in Europe, sometimes you have to just turn up the heat and just fight fire with fire. I think back to some players like, I mean, well, you know about Forgiven, right, Rich? In terms of a guy that was you have to forcefully defend your ideals against some players because they do exactly the same thing and actually can be quite constructive. I've known people in my own life who I've played League with or worked in other ways where actually sometimes hashing it out no holds barred can actually be constructive, but it's quite rare that that is the case. I say this as like an edge case scenario. There are only certain people which I trust enough to do that actually.
And the other side of that is actually if you're yelling because actually you just want to insult your players or belittle them or make them feel small and unheard, then actually you're not being constructive. You're not actually helping. This is not to pull your finger out, which is a problem.
Which is why when we talk about this, like, is this coming from a point of this didn't work for me, and there are some cases where it is unprofessional, and then there goes right to the level of it's safeguarding issue. Actually, someone's actually being verbally abusive, blah blah blah. So we don't have the context on that, and this is why if you're gonna come out about this stuff, you gotta be damn sure like this is stuff which should be in the public as well. And actually, by the way, if coaches are mistreating players or just anyone's mistreating anyone within the scenes of that, you should be open about it to someone. I think. I mean. That's definitely something which I think should be supported more. But the problem with talking about this stuff publicly is that unless it does muddy things very, very quickly, and you need to be very certain that you have the right information out there and it's actually constructively leading to something.
So, great example of this is to throw back to some drama from 2 years ago. Ruddy, when they were first coming up in the NLC, made an incredible parody video that basically people didn't realize was a parody until they listened to the whole video. Basically, where they had one of their coaches come in and start yelling at the players, and it was a very British style of satire where it's played very straight, and you only realize that it is not
all
actually
I told
you
to do was play 6 hours of solo queue and eat 3 pieces of fruit.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like, and the more you listen to it, the more ridiculous it gets, and you kind of realize that actually what it is a parody of people who do this realistically, and it's actually a takedown of people who are doing this, not a celebration.
Oh my god! Then there was. I just remembered the.
And then exactly.
Yes.
This is what, because guess who quote retweeted it and then said, this is exactly what you need to do something. It was bloody Fly from Rogue at the time. Quote retweeted it. And then basically the whole of Ruddy came in and went, basically, mate, you have just outed yourself in the worst way. This is not us agreeing with this.
I'd only
it was
just
a quick delete
that.
on there. I don't know who's got screenshots of that, if anyone's got the video, but it was a whole thing, and it was utterly ridiculous. But it was one of those ones where it's like, you have just outed yourself in the worst kind of way, because that's the kind of thing we're talking about. It's like, that is not the way you coach. That is not the way you choose to yell at people. That's not constructive. It's not. It's a really bad way of doing it, and it was a deliberate parody that people got quite. It ended up causing a small scale amount of drama because people didn't quite recognize that it was a parody at the time.
At the time, I didn't instantly realize it was a parody, and the only issue I remember having a slight issue with it, and I think I spoke to Jake about it at the time, is that they didn't immediately like clarify. They posted it and let it sit there for ages.
Yeah, that added to the impact, but it does add some concerns.
And they had sort of set it up beforehand, but with not enough engagement. They'd set it up that they were going to send someone in to do it, but it was like 20 people who'd seen it.
The only thing I'd seen was the actual video itself, and it was obviously presented as like a leak, and I was like, this like feels like such a parody, but I actually can't see any evidence at all that it is a parody. So this is kind of like a weird thing to let sit and simmer. But no, I forgot that Fly got baited by that. Is so. Oh, that is
case in point, basically, when there are bad ways of coaching, and for me, that was not a great sign.
Yeah. Anyway, let's talk about the teams that are still participating in the league, shall we? So Na'Vi, obviously, definitely, as far as I'm concerned, the surprise package of the league. I had them dead last for anyone who wants to save time by not checking back the power rankings. Dead last, and they obviously have looked like one of the better teams in the league versus Fnatic, who somehow, I guess I overestimated their ability because they just barely scraped into playoffs. And truth be told, I would rather, like, forget all the storylines or whatever, just purely on player strength and team strength. I'd rather LR in playoffs instead of Fnatic. I think Fnatic have looked like dog in a lot of these games. And as referenced earlier, I think they got lucky with some of their scheduling because they got to play teams like LR in like their first ever game. So it's like, if they played now, how would that look? Like, I think I would probably favour LR. So that is obviously our first matchup. Now we're going, of course, into best ofs, real League of Legends, as Kira would have us call it. So yeah, Nymaera, what are your initial thoughts going into this one?
Well, Fnatic's off-season was largely hinged around the fact that communication outside of the game and the way that they think about the game was flawed. They got rid of Mickey, they added in Losper, they brought in Vladdy, because apparently he's better at, like, talking through the ideas of the game to try and stop it being about Upset versus Razork in the way that they think about the game, because actually they thought they could make it work as long as they added more voices in to help make it a more communal conversation rather than just one person against the other. Now Fnatic looks like they don't fucking talk to each other. What the fuck has gone on here? This is absolutely atrocious. This team is not communicative. I don't actually have specific clips for this, but I do remember some specific moments where it looked like no one trusted each other to do damage at the right moment. So Razork on Shinzao was like jumping in when someone was already dead because no one trusted each other to have the damage for it. They didn't look like they knew what damage they had around dragon fights, around whatever. And it just meant that Razork was going in too deep in the traditional Razork way because he doesn't trust what his backline's doing. His backline is watching like him go in because they obviously haven't communicated that, that they can do the damage as well. I cannot believe that this team, like, the whole point of this offseason was hinged around communication. Sam, what was the clip?
If you go right down to the bottom in the links I sent over, there should be one there. This is an event. It's not. It's kind of this. It's slightly different, but this is basically Fnatic's communications being horrifically off in terms of basically triaging and judging a play. Sorry to cut you off there, mate. I know you were mid rant.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
But yeah, so this is basically G2 are going to go for this invade. They've got the Bard and the Shinto going on in, and immediately you can see all the pings. Razork and Vladdy rushing to get over here, and look where all their lanes are. The prio is not there, and they're going to go for this fight, and it is a disaster. It is an even enough game at this point, and they are there late. They make this force over. They have no lane prio, and they still say, yeah, we can make this happen. We can make this happen. And I don't know who is making the judgment calls in terms of what plays you can test, what ones you can't. I think they just clearly felt like we've got to make the defend here, and it was a disaster. They give up 3 kills, and the game falls apart.
The game's just over.
This is the play for me that breaks this game, and G2 then break all LR fans' hearts. Fnatic still look incredibly dysfunctional, and it's all off basically an absolutely atrocious invade defense. And yes, look, Labrov comes over. Vality's just had to flash and burn his ult, so you're contesting this with no prio bot, no prio mid. You've burned flash and ult on your Azir, and you're still going to contest this? Like, who makes this call? Who makes this kind of like assessment of the situation, said this is what we're going to do? Fnatic have never been good at taking slow plays. Like, the entirety of the time they've had the likes of Razork and Oscar and Mickey and whoever else has been on the roster. But this has got to be one of the worst. And comms are poor, decision making is poor, judgment in terms of reading plays on the fly and rapid assessments and reassessments of what's going on in the game is poor. And this is against a G2 that bluntly has had some of their own issues with this front, actually, that they haven't been that tight and snappy in the traditional G2 grouped up plays and map movements that made them the team that they were for the last 5 years, bluntly, whatever the rosters have been. And yes, I agree. Look, there's a lack of trust. Part of the problem is when people do trust them, they they have these kind of things. Like, actually, where is someone saying, God, no, this is a bad play? Like, it's caught between two extremes, and this just doesn't get better.
I mean, what's apparently as well, because obviously Cadril co-streams all the games. Apparently he was just like completely silent, like watching this game, because obviously this happened early on as well. Apparently he was like basically mute. Well,
can you blame him?
No, it's
I would be there too.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I was talking to Yamato earlier, like I was saying, and basically he was saying that, they went home earlier in the day because there's no point sticking around because there weren't tiebreakers. And they said as soon as they came to the Fnatic match, they didn't have any hope. They just didn't have hope. You just don't trust Fnatic with playoff chance like that on the line. And especially with them in this state, can you blame them?
Yeah. So yeah, obviously their opponents are Na'Vi. So I guess, Sam, I'll start with you. In terms of what you've seen from both these teams, and we've talked about the lack of trust we may have in Fnatic, how much trust do you have in Na'Vi, and how do you see this one going?
Great, guys, come close. Don't tune in. Do not tune in. If you're a Fnatic fan or have a weak heart, it is going to be the worst thing you have seen in your life. It is going to be pain. Just pain. Because what is going to happen is Na'Vi, coached by The Rock, who has come up and given this team an identity, are going to say, Rilek, go kill. And Rilek is going to go, yes, boss. And Razork is going to sit there and realize that he could play just as well with his keyboard disconnected for all the help and assistance and team moves that is going to be made in his jungle. And that play we just saw from G2 there is going to happen on repeat. And it will be so graphic, the LEC will be forced to stream after 9 p.m. to ensure the watershed is okay.
I mean, actually, it's a great point that the really unfortunate thing for Fnatic, I think, is that Rilek is actually really good, and Razork is where you might hope that you could get an edge over, a playoff opponent. But if you can't get that edge, I'm kind of struggling to see what the win cons are here for Fnatic. But yeah,
upset or bust.
Yeah, well, sure. Nymaera, what do you think about the actual matchup itself? Do you like Na'Vi here, or what do you think?
I mean, yeah, I do, and I think it'd be dumb to like say it another way because Fnatic are just not coordinated. I think that Na'Vi have had good drafts. I think that I've talked a little bit with Rilek and DMs about some of his jungle pathing actually as well, and this guy clearly has a very good. Yeah. I messaged him after week 1. I was like, "Yo, you're fucking special. Like, make the most of this debut, basically." Yeah, I think this guy has a really good eye for the game. His champion pool is really good too, and I think that if Razork is not on his A game because his lanes aren't playing well or something like that, this is going to be a bit of a slaughter. Now, I say that with Fnatic having won the best of one of them in regular season. I think Na'Vi have only gotten better since then. I know they lost the last game versus MKOI, right? But I think Na'Vi still impressed an awful lot. The one thing which I'd hold against Na'Vi is that their lanes are inconsistent. Sometimes they don't stick to the early game plan or they mis-execute. So, for instance, Samdi and Paris have actually been very good. On the whole, I think that Samdi in particular has really, really impressed me. But occasionally they've not judged what's going to happen in bot lane. And that ends up kind of undermining Rilek. Now, there's a really good example of this, but I'm not going to go get the clip because I need to go search for a while for it. But there's basically one from week 1 where Rilek is in, or it might have been week 2, but he was playing the Aatrox jungle. He goes for a level 1 invade, and then he tries to get a camp ahead of the Jarvan, and Jarvan ends up diving bot. But the only reason that happens is because the bot lane takes an awful level 1 trade. But they have like an Alistar, which was a counter pick support. And it's like, you're not going to win the lane, but the whole point is that you're undivable. And they took such a bad level 1 trade, but lose all the HP and the barrier. They were diveable, and it threw Rilek's early jungle path, which was Aatrox into Jarvan. And if Aatrox ever gets ahead of Jarvan, the game is just over. And we've seen that really well from him. Like even against KC, a team which are much more organized on the map, he was getting like a triple kill against them too. He's really, really impressed me. The one thing I'll say is that Na'Vi's lanes can sometimes be quite weak. Problem is, Fnatic are not the team to exploit that. They're not the team to exploit that right now. I think that Emperos has been fine. I think arguably the problem with Emperos is that he's more stable, but he won't give you like explosive victories in the way that Oscarinin could rarely do. And like Oscarinin does deserve a lot of flack for what he was on Fnatic before, particularly
if I
towards the
can
end.
jump in there briefly,
Yeah,
the thing that frustrates me with that is actually, for those who don't know, Emperos, before his name change, was known as Jaxplank. He has played with Vladdy back in ERLs. Back in 2022, he was on Riddle, and they were a really good duo. They were this Greek
played
duo.
in PGNets too in spring of that
Yeah,
year.
he played in PGNets, exactly. And this guy is an incredible Jax and Gangplank true trick. He's grown out from there, but you have actually got a guy who does know how to play carries, but I don't think the team has really ever given him the opportunity to look at them, especially. Like, actually, I think Gangplank is quite good in this current meta. You can run Exhaust into things like Rumble and have a TP for later and still have your Cannon Barrage and actually be very dangerous right now. Why are you not leveraging that? And partly, I think it's because Fnatic are still trying to find a system and a baseline to work around, and that's been very problematic. And Emperos is still new here. It's not a great space for a rookie to come into and show his stuff, which is going to be frustrating. I do think that if there is a world where Na'Vi... Actually, if you got more to finish on this point, Alex, before I go on a tangent.
I mean, mainly just saying that Na'Vi's lanes have sometimes dropped a little bit. Poby's occasionally been good. I don't think he's been exceptional. But then again, Vladdy has been awful for Fnatic in the last couple of games. So I think, look, I think on paper, if you'd asked me before we'd seen any gameplay, I'd be like, well, maybe a little bit more. If I hadn't seen any gameplay from Fnatic just on Name Valley, I'd be like, okay, Na'Vi might actually get pushed around in lanes and maybe Relic won't have the platform to play. As long as like there's no sudden revival from a bunch of Fnatic players, like this is going to be a very difficult watch.
If you want a potential way it could go wrong, have you got the Na'Vi bad invade clip loaded up?
I have it loaded up here, yes.
So
this was their
when
last game?
it was. This was against MKOI. It was on the last game. And this is basically where it kind of goes wrong. Because when Na'Vi do end up struggling, if it's not the lane issue, it's when Rilek ends up puts behind, because he is such a linchpin for this team, and they develop and divert so many resources to getting Rilek ahead. This was an attempt at an invade on Raptors that goes horribly wrong, and you give a gold lead over to, of all people, Elyoya and the crew. Like, this is just a bit of a disaster. And if you have these early aggressive jungle rotations that are the bread and butter of Na'Vi in their current iteration, then you end up basically having the whole game plan fall apart. They don't really have a plan B right now because they don't have necessarily the strength from the laners. And so if there is a world where actually Fnatic do come in with a game plan, they defend the early invades well, and Rilek is the one put behind, then maybe Fnatic have a way to come forward, because then they can rely on perhaps the strength of some of their laners, say Upset, to come on through. And this is potentially one of those kind of like cornerstones in the Na'Vi plan. If for whatever reason Rilek is taken out of the game, Na'Vi do sometimes just end up going, well, what's plan B? There isn't one. And that could be my way of seeing that go wrong. And this is basically where the game for me falls apart. It's only the one invade, but it gets Elyoya ahead, it gets Jojo ahead, and you've got a Vitalier that can basically then outdo what Rilek wanted to do in this game on the Pantheon, and you fell apart from there.
Yeah. No, I think the fact that this is series play will be really interesting from both perspectives, because you're going to see, I mean, apart from anything else, as I said, with Jack's Plank, or sorry, Emperors, maybe you will see maybe you will see Gangplank at some point during this series. Maybe you will see Na'Vi pushed into a spot where they actually do have to use plan Bs or whatever. As we mentioned before, this is now real League of Legends, so there is a big difference between best of ones and series play. And experience is something that you can't buy, right? So maybe, even though I would say that historically Razork's not been an amazing playoff performer, he's been there a million times over at this level.
Nope.
So, you know, and of course,
he's one of the. He's just not a big game player, is he? It's really sad.
He's not. But yeah, no, I think it'll be a really interesting one. I obviously favour Na'Vi, but yeah, we will see with that one. Now, moving on to everyone's favourite team, or what should be everyone's favourite team, Vitality, obviously, aka Naknako Gaming. Naknako Gaming is versus MKOI, who I would suggest pretty lucky to be in playoffs at this point, to be honest, especially based on how the last week was sort of panning out. I think this, to me, is definitely the most interesting and fun matchup, like, for sure, because I mean, you used the word last segment, Nymaera, of, you know, talking about the differences between Oscaranin and Emperos, and using the word explosive. I mean, these two teams are the absolute personification of
yes, you have explosive, and then you have explosive diarrhea.
Yes, exactly. You have explosion and implosion on both sides of the rift, I would say here. Obviously, Super is almost at this point, I think it's fair to say at least this split is quite a Jekyll and Hyde AD carry. He can win you games, he can lose you games. Great ceiling, pretty bad floor. Vitality are the kings of great ceiling, bad floor, or like almost across the board. Again, the great irony being their big coin flipper last split, Nako is now probably their most sure thing when it comes to carrying, which is exactly what we hoped would happen, that someone who is a prestigious talent would shore up the weaknesses and make the coin land heads more times than it did tails, and that is more or less the direction he is heavily trending in, whereas Humanoid is still Humanoid. Love him and hate him. He's got a little bit of everything, and to a certain extent Kazi's had that as part of his identity, I think, as well, along his entire career arc. I'm still not convinced by Fleshy, although he has had more positive moments recently, I would say, but he also has Fleshy moments. So yeah, I think this is like this is going to be an awesome series. I can't see a world where this isn't an awesome series, and I can't see a world where both teams don't win a game, to be honest. But Sam, what are your thoughts on this matchup?
I think obviously
it's best of 3, remember? So it's
it's exactly best of 3. So best of 3 thing. I think weirdly, a lot of this is going to come around the various jungle duos because I think obviously Elyoy is the beating heart of MKOI. He has been for a very long time. Yes, there are other players who are coin flip, but I think realistically, the jungler that helps his team get a lead will probably end up giving you the advantage in these games. And we've seen actually when Yoya doesn't get that kind of early lead, sometimes the side of MKOI look a lot more lost. There have been issues with Super then. Being that Jekyll and Hyde AD carry, we've chatted a bit about where people like Jojo can be, who has these incredible laning phases, and then just a one brain fade moment, you go, what on earth was that decision making? And it kind of falls apart. And it's a lot easier if your captain, your playmaker, the guy making moves, alongside Alpha, to be fair, are linking up to make things happen. For the side of Vitality, everyone coin flips, and if you can just get everyone on the same damn page, it makes a massive difference. And Fleshy is something of the stabilizing factor, at least chatting to some of the guys behind the scenes. I know some of the backroom staff.
Oh, right. It's like in
Yeah,
gameplay, that doesn't come across, Sam.
No, exactly. But no, and again, his laning is whatever. But the idea is he's supposed to be something of like of a player around those team fights for better or worse.
He had a game-winning
to make
engage
some of those
this week. You know, that Nico
Yeah, he
engage
did.
mid was
He did
pretty sexy.
exactly. And exactly, and again, the laning phase is whatever, and again, that is what it is. But you have got a lot of very volatile players, and that should be interesting to track. I think the other thing is here you've got a lot of players with some intriguing champion pools. So there is a very real world for the first time because we're coming into Fearless. Someone who's coming with a good plan, a good draft, particularly for whatever's happening with those kind of jungle duos, be that mid jungle, be that jungle support, to get people rolling alongside some cool drafts. I think we could see some really fun stuff here. Naknako's always had a wild champion pool. Mirwin's always had a wild champion pool. And again, I was hopeful that Alfari coming onto the roster. I'm surprised G2 let him go, actually. I know I was chatting with Peter
As a coach, which we
yeah, so he's a coach in the base positional coach, and again, I think BB's form has been a little bit more suspect this split, and I wonder how much of that is not having Alfari to coach him on the fundamentals of lane, which is what Alfari was always the best.
I'm not going to give like too much on that, but yeah, it would have maybe helped. Yeah.
Again, it's just a suspicion, but there you go. I don't know what that will mean for Muin here, who's I still haven't been sold on, and I know he made that very kind of like anime shonen protagonist statement about saying I want to make sure that MKOI regret not signing me again straight away. I want to justify my position here, kind of thing.
And then got brutally destroyed against Vitality.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting because again, the lanes are all fun and volatile. I think I actually possibly favor Vitality here because I think Nako could be a real problem for them. But I think for me, it'll a lot of it depend on which jungler gets stuff to work with, whatever that may be.
Yeah, what do you think, Nymaera? I mean, I actually
There's a
find
lot
this
of moving pieces.
very hard to pick series,
Agreed.
by the way.
Well,
very hard.
Also because, like, look, my biggest issue with MKOI in regular season is I thought they were arrogant. I thought they were super arrogant. I think that there were a couple of interviews with, there was an interview rather with Jojo who was like, look, obviously we're kind of off form right now, but not, and when, you know, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember what the exact quote is, but he's saying, like, if we didn't make playoffs, that would be utterly unacceptable. And they did end up making it in, but
by hook and crook, yeah.
By hook or by crook, really. I am very interested to see. Look, I think Humanoid is clearly playing better, and I think that he said that his mental health was in the dumps last year. No surprise, bench from Fnatic. Things weren't great on that team in general. And he's saying actually now he's feeling a lot better. I think that I think Vitality's been a better environment for him. Being with Kazi is a better thing for him as well. I think that we now have to reconsider things like, well, Humanoid typically used to be shit in regular season and very good in playoffs. Actually, Jojo last year was glowing in playoffs an awful lot too and I think Jojo had a bit of a shit regular split. Actually, does that mean that we're going to have two mid laners ramping up against each other? And they're kind of, if we actually get Jojo versus Humanoid, with both them getting somewhat playoffs buffs coming out of the regular season, going into best of 3, this could be an excellent mid lane matchup, folks. I mean, Humanoid has peaked as peaked as second best mid laner in LEC. Whatever, I mean, it's up there with Caps, right? I mean, I don't know how much of a peak we're going to see from him, but there have been some games in these best of ones where I'm like, okay, this guy's looking really good. I think his Zoe game was good versus MKOI too. And Jojo, of course, was excellent last year. Was really, really good when he got on form. I'm really excited to see what we see in terms of a playoff ramp up. I'm glad we get to see best of series between them as well. But yeah, I have to go back to Sam. I think that Elioyo was clearly the best player on MKOI, and if Linsus does not get to stick in the ring I think that this game is pretty toast. Now, Linces obviously did do that in that best of one. Great bot lane gank. I think there's going to be so much work put into early jungle pathing and early warding patterns to try and get that first gank of the game off. I think that I think that the prep teams are going to be working overdrive for this. I'm actually not sure how much of the staff on MKOI remains from when players like Humanoid and Kazi were on the roster.
I think it's largely been shifted out.
I think in fact, actually, I think a lot of that staff's gone to Vitality. Interestingly, which will be very interesting to see how well they download MKOI. Because folks, there is like, there's definitely going to be some stakes in that too from a lot of the players on Vitality and the staff on Vitality, which used to be on MKOI as well, because obviously a lot of them ended up over there. Which, I think that MKOI was sleeping through regular season. I thought they were arrogant. I thought they were very nearly out of regular season. I think that best of ones definitely took advantage of that too. I think that it'll be closer than the regular series game. I think that MKOI got a bit of a wake-up call. They're going into playoffs now. They're going into a series. This is very hard to call, as Rich is saying. Do I bite the razor cake of Vitality?
I did, but I have no. This is my first time doing it, so I've yet to be left bleeding and in pain.
That beautiful taste of the razor cake before the metallic taste of blood starts to kick in. Yeah. The thing is, I still probably do favor Vitality a little bit. I think Knock is fucking great. I think that Humanoid, if he ramps up from his regular season form as well, which I did think was bad anyway, and he was showing some cool stuff, and if also, Alvaro is also not on great form and Flashy's still serviceable, I think Flashy had a better, like you're saying, he had a better regular season than I think I was expecting of him, but then again, my expectations were pretty low. I think Vitality do come in as favorites, but I definitely see a world in which MKOI just turn on Eloy Alvaro and they just completely slap him for 6.
I'm going to take that as a Vitality endorsement overall.
Oh, it'll be like Vitality 2-1.
And just to be different, I'll go MKOI. I think I sort of buy in a little bit into what you said, where I think with some teams, the experience doesn't mean much, i.e. Fnatic, looking at you. I'm not sure the fact that they have loads of playoff experience means a damn, because they're usually super disappointing in playoffs. But whereas MKOI, I think they do have legitimate...
clutch.
Yeah, they're more trustworthy is the word I would use. They're just more trustworthy. I mean, do I really trust a humanoid playoff team? Like, not really. Do I trust Vitality as an org? Not really. Do I want them to do well? Absolutely, because I think they have the potential. Well, I think they're already the most fun team, and I think if this team is playing at its absolute apex, it is for sure the most fun team in the league. So yeah, I want them to do well, but I'll go MKOI for this series, I guess. Right. Sorry, did you have something to say, Sam? Just before I move us on?
No, I just want to say, but the other thing is they're still the most entertaining team when they're at the opposite of the apex. Where they're at the negative apex, it's still very entertaining. True. So either way, you're going to have a great popcorn moment.
Oh, no, this is the best series. Like, on paper, this is the best series for sure.
For sure.
Without a doubt. Moving on to Heretics versus G2. Now, Heretics, a team that your boy, said would make playoffs, said would be relatively competitive. I do think I think they probably got a bit lucky in the same way that LR got unlucky, which is teams that had more to play for were playing against teams that had less to play for and so on. I think Heretics got the right games in the right order, let's put it that way. So I think they were maybe the slight beneficiaries of that, but they're an interesting team. I think what's really fun, I guess, despite the annoying format situation about this split, is that there's a lot of parity in the league. A lot of parity. There is no runaway, we are the best by a mile. KC came top, but are KC by far the best team? I don't think so. I think you've also got some sleeping giants in there. I think G2 will, I'm not saying they'll win the split or whatever, but I think G2 will be significantly better than they've shown.
Gotta hope.
In playoffs. So I think it's a very open league. And I think this is the best time, obviously, for Heretics to play G2. Now, I think G2 are favoured, probably no matter what. But I think this is as good a shot as you're going to get against G2. And obviously, Heretics, even if it's slight, are on a slight upswing. So yeah, Nymaera, what are your thoughts about this series? Do you think Heretics... What's Heretics' win condition here if they are to win? And you can't just say BB playing horrendously. Because that's the
It's pretty slim. They need to read the map better early and go for some of the explosive plays that they did against KC. I mean, I thought that Stand was maybe worst support in the early, well, maybe not worst, but he was one of the worst performing supports
wasn't doing well, yeah.
for most this regular split. And then he locked in for the game versus KC and just blasted them. I thought he had a really good game. A lot of people were praising Seren, but Seren was kind of saved by the fact that bot lane ended up setting him up for success. And the other thing is Sheo needs to be on the form he was on too. Stuff like flexing the Rumble into jungle was so big brain, by the way.
Yeah.
That was so huge for them. Look, Trayson was kind of shit on the MS, not gonna lie. Until the late game, he really fell behind early. The solo lanes are very weak for Heretics in terms of individual solo lanes, but in terms of individual laning prowess anyway. But I think Heretics needs to come in, creative draft, creative early game plans. This basically it's the same stuff that we run against for any kind of underdog team. It's just come in with an early game plan, slap them just and get ahead early. That's what they did versus KC because like that KC game. Obviously there was some caveats about it and question marks. Were they trying hard? Blah blah blah. Allegations. Like no, I actually think that Heretics were just really quite good. I mean, in fact, actually, do you mind if we just watch a clip quite quickly from the early game? Because what I want to set up here, so for those of you who are audio only, this is just before 9 minutes in Heretics versus Carmine Corp. This is the match which Heretics need to kind of get into playoffs, and obviously this is in the chain of events which allowed Fnatic to get, well, multiple teams to get in over Lost Ratones as well. I want you to notice what's happening with like the early game mid lane, because Seren got counterpicked in mid lane as Aurora versus LeBlanc, and is currently like 25 CS down, going on 30 CS. Has got chunked out again. Like his game is going shit. Now it's worth noting that earlier in the game, Stand had a really good flash over a route to get a kill into Callisto, I believe. I think that was the kill that they had earlier. And gets another max range hook as Yike is coming towards bot side. Typically you'd say, well, okay, you're in a 2v3, this is not looking great. But they have a great ward behind them where Seren just goes, okay, screw this, I'm going to teleport. Lane's over for me anyway, let's get something outside of it. And I think Callisto and Busio assume they were in the 2v3. Flash over another route, which I think happened earlier in the game too, and Seren, despite getting blasted in lane, ends up walking away with a double kill. Like, these kinds of ambitious early game plays are what won Heretics this game, despite being very far behind from lane. The way that they lose this game is that it becomes about lane, because I don't think Heretics are good laners. I think that Ice is fine. I think that Sten was not great for most of the split, and I think that Seren and Trayson will literally just lose you a game if it just becomes about that. They need to somehow just make the game about frenetic, scrappy early game plays as quickly as possible with quick engaged champions like Leon and Nautilus. That's pretty much the only clip I wanted to show from that, just in terms of just get them out of lane ASAP. But if that doesn't happen, I think they are kind of boned.
I concur. I think that if there was a potential angle to attack G2 from Team Heretics, it will be through bot lane, because I think Labrov and Hansama have not looked particularly comfortable as a duo this year. I don't know how much to put onto Labrov. I think that's the easy choice because he's the newer member of the team, took a little while to get rolling last year.
I can help you
People
out here,
sure.
Sam. I can help you out quickly. And this, by the way, this isn't based on talking to him or anything like that. Usually, during the course of the season, other than good lucks here and stuff like that, I try not to, farm people for information while they're in a high stress situation. But all I will say is I think at the beginning of last year, when Labrov did not start the year well, let's put it that way, and Hansama was playing fine, and if you think about how that looked and how that manifested on the map, particularly like the disconnects between Skewmon and Labrov as well, I am not really seeing parallels here at all. But what I am seeing is, separate to Labrov, whatever issues you may think Labrov has or not, Hans is getting caught all the time. And that wasn't happening last year. Like, Hans is just playing badly. So my conjecture, and it is conjecture, I don't think I put much of Hans's bad performance on Labrov at all, because I've not seen this happen whatsoever. There seems to be a big disconnect. Whatever Labrov issues that Labrov may have, independent of that on his own, might be his own issues. But I think Hans is playing badly because Hansama is playing badly. That
was my take too. But it's like bot lane duos are bot lane duos,
yes,
and there's always
sure,
that element of like, look, you play together.
It's
How much of that is that? And so there is that symbiosis there. But yes, for me this time around, I think it's just Hansama playing quite poorly. And if that then means Stend is coming in with a little bit of confidence after that and can start finding some of those big engage plays, Ice is a fantastic player once he's got a platform and some kills to work with. He's not the strongest laner per se, but if you get him kills, my God, will he deliver on it? He's the reason he got several pentakills and stuff. And again, I don't think it's been the easiest team to be an aggressive laner because bluntly, your mid and top laner getting shoved in, that puts Shayo into an awful position. So your ability to have your jungler come help you out is somewhat limited if the jungle pathing is kind of tracked because of that kind of lane priority stuff like jungling is always a team sport, and if Sheo is put in a difficult spot, how much agency does he actually have to be able to come down bot lane on good timers? Not always the easiest, right? But if you were going to attack G2, a bot lane that's struggling, particularly Hans Sammer, that gets Ice ahead, and then you defend it like we just saw in that clip. Ice in this clip is 2-0. Both Kalista and Busio was 0-1. KC, understandably, want to get their superstar AD carry ahead. You've got the Jace, that incredible pick from the jungle to start making things happen. He gets turned around. Then, actually, if Seren then gets to come and join in the team fight play, make that teleport bot, just aggressively defend the lead bot lane, maybe that's where you can do it. Because I actually think G2 have not been as clean as playing as a team in terms of making those rapid snap plays. And the bot lane's been struggling. That's maybe the angle in. I agree it's a relatively narrow win condition, but at least it's there.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Nymaera, in terms of G2's issues, do you think these are things that can just be flicked like a light switch? Or do you think there are more fundamental problems here that we should really be worried about?
There are fundamental issues. It's just how quickly can they sort them. I don't think they understand the meta matchups very well right now, unless Caps is on like Orianna. I think Caps, if he's ahead of the game, they know how to win through him. I don't think BB understands a lot of the top lane matchups very well right now. I think that he's well off the mark with stuff like the Lee Sin, especially stuff like Hannah. I don't think they will beat KC. I just don't think they can with the way that they're playing right now. I said this right the way from week one, but I don't think they understood the bot lane meta. I think it's taken. I think that LEC as a whole didn't understand the bot lane meta very well, but G2 were also among that in terms of, oh, we're just going to pick Corki into Yunara, and that's obviously not worked very well. And basically, it's I know technically LCK the stats are okay for it now, but realistically that matchup just doesn't win very well.
Yeah, you need Nami as well. Yeah,
yeah. You need like a bunch of stuff going well, and even then that wasn't working very well in LEC particularly. So. And while I think that actually Scumon's been pulling his weight, especially in the first 5 minutes, he's actually been very good at getting something to work, and I think that Labrov's okay at combining with that. I don't think this team understands the breakpoints of matchups early or mid unless it's Caps just dumpstering a lane. So Hans Labrov and then BB really need to drill matchups, like really drill matchups. You cannot afford to have players of this caliber just not understanding how to play the meta matchups right now and how to abuse them very well. G2 might just be a team which doesn't do well on game one of the day and they're better in best ofs, but I don't want to see them losing game ones anyway, really. That will hurt them. They'll always hurt them. You never want to just give up a free game in a series. And then, yeah, I think then obviously drafts play into that, right? I think that they were quite good at Fearless for a while, and Dylan had this reputation as a very good drafting coach. I don't know if I'd give him that now. I don't know if I'd give him that. I don't think that... Obviously, it's a collaboration between players and coach, but I haven't been convinced with their drafts. Maybe with a little bit of time off.
Way, I think even though there was a period where they'd like sort of figured it out a little bit, I actually think over the breadth of last year, they were bad at drafting in Fearless.
Yes, I totally agree. They had like 1 or 2 weeks where I was like, okay, this looks really good. And Caps are saying, oh, we think we could get to like draft 13 of Fearless before we started running out of champions. It's like, or like they could theory craft what they'd pick at that point. And I'm like, that's all well and good thinking about that. But realistically, I mean, well, we saw what happened to them in winter finals when they gave all their draft priorities over to KC and scrims and in the upper bracket, whatever, and then got dumped in the finals when KC just outdrafted them, right? And so, I think that G2, and I don't even think their team fighting's been fantastic. I mean, you look at how they lost to LR. I don't think they were very good at theory crafting on the fly what's going wrong with the comp.
Yeah.
I think in the past, I would trust Caps to figure out what's wrong with a game. How do you outplay it from late game? Because he would always be able to find some way back into the game because he understood how they were winning and losing games. Like in the same way that Perks used to do as well, and that's why they were so good together. They'd always find a way to get back into the game. I don't think this team understands what wins and loses them League of Legends right now.
Yeah, I think something that we even spoke about, and it could apply to MKOI as well. You're just kind of hoping applies to G2, which is sad, but would be that they just weren't particularly caring that much about LEC versus regular season, and they're sort of just doing enough to get by. Again, I don't want that to be the
I
case.
think that's unlikely, knowing them.
As far as I'm
Well,
aware, that's not the case.
No,
But yeah.
that's some copium, I suppose. But also, it's double-edged copium, even if it's true, because then I'm thinking, what the hell are they doing if that is true? So yeah, I don't know. I guess the way that I'll more positively frame it as I hope that the fire that is playoffs ignites their ability to play League of Legends better. Because as of right now, as you said, I don't see them beating KC. I think the delta between BB and Canna is way too big. I think the delta between most of the players on KC is actually too big right now, and I don't see how they quickly bridge that gap unless they've really got ahead this week on drafting issues, because I think they've, even in this regular season, I think they've had major drafting issues. I think if you're doing a league table of the best drafting teams, they wouldn't have made playoffs. Let's put it that way. So yeah, that to me, like, I can't. Skewmond is the thing you can point to and say that's positive. He's playing well. He's still one of the best junglers for sure right now. Caps does still sprinkle in those games where he is Caps, and you're like, okay, damn, this guy still exists. But there's far too many of his craps games rearing their head. And again, Hansama, I made the analogy the other week. Hansama is looking like rogue Hansama, very good player who's just getting caught way too often and straight up losing games. So yeah, I think that's it's worrying signs for G2, but I definitely don't think it's like beyond the realms of possibility that they right the ship.
And like, if I think I'll step in here as well, because again, I think you're right about them not playing the meta matchups well. I don't think their kind of off meta stuff has been as successful as they'd like. But part of that is bluntly just people just not playing lane well. Like Hansama and Broken Blade have lost matchups or gone behind in matchups they never should have done. I'm reminded of that the GT Vunavi game, day one of, I suppose, this week that's just gone, where, what was it? Like, it was like a 2,000 gold lead to a Scion versus a Renekton. Like, should that be happening for Broken Blade? Renekton versus Scion is not a new matchup. It's not something that Broken Blade is unused to playing. If you've been playing pro top lane for any number of years, you have played Renekton versus Scion. You should be better than going 1-5 in that matchup. Yeah. And yes, there were other issues, other things went wrong, but that is a tough place to be. But my other point there as well is I do think that G2 have misjudged a lot of their proactive plays, partly because I think players have not been from working off the platforms they've been used to, but their time to execute and their time to exit judgments are off. By which I mean, we are grouping to make this play, and G2 of the past were one of the best teams of taking one play and waterfalling it into other plays. We get this kill top that leads us to this turret, means we can move down to the dragon, we can move to this, and they'd have this moment in the game where it was even, and suddenly they've claimed like 3 things on the map, and that was partly what Mickey would set up by his very aggressive warding movements.
Yeah, that was like their 23-24 identity, really.
Yeah, and that's a little different with Skewmond in the team, but they're a little more structured. But it's still
the way that I used to for 25, I used to call them the checklist team. It wasn't really about the waterfall. We're saying, oh, actually, we've set up players in advance, so we can kind of like take a small win and then domino it. Yeah, that was their identity with Mickey and Jack, and it was very fun to watch. But it was also quite inconsistent, because what happens if they don't set up well for that first play?
Bingo.
Well, yes. However, I think that last year they were the checklist team in terms of like, okay, we've got pushing lanes, we've got wards in this location, we know the XYZ power spikes, we can do this.
Yep.
And they were very consistent at pulling that off, I think. But it did lack some. Now they don't even have the checklist. I don't think they actually know what to put on the checklist.
So
now
exactly, and like when they are winning and they've got those platforms, like we just saw that clip earlier in the stream of the invade that G2 made onto Fnatic, where Fnatic came and contested, never should have contested, and G2 had the platform to make that invade become devastating for Fnatic, and it set up a great game from them. And that's great. They got the exit, they got the time to execute right, and they got the time to exit right. The problem is, like, actually, sometimes we're seeing G2 make a play and try and execute, but then they try and get out of it. The one I'm thinking of is their loss to LR, where they got done in by that Kled charge. So it's all right, we'll have someone blocking, I'll just tank that up. And they just don't get the exit right, and then everyone dies and it's game over. And that's after they tried to make a proactive move, and it went horribly wrong. And I think some of those judgments where, as a team, we've made this proactive move. Okay, how long is this going to take to contest? How long will it take before people come and respond? They've not got those timings quite right, and it's like, okay, well, we need to bug out, and they're not getting those exit plans quite right. And that's actually something that LR were always incredibly good at punishing, was actually the exit plays from objectives. Like, we've done all the hard work, we've got the dragon, we did the setup, we won the fight, but we took 10 seconds too long getting out of this play, and now LR have been able to TP in or get a player to move over and get something out of this play they never should have been able to. That's something they were always very strong at and showed again at LEC level. I don't think G2 have been making those judgment calls consistently, particularly in the losses. You go, oh God, guys, what have you done in the mid game? And yes, part of that is matchups not going the way they should have done, so they're not playing from a position they should be in. But I do think part of that as well is I just think their judgment calls have been off in terms of timings more than they have been in previous years.
Yeah. I think either way, it's fair to say that regardless of all of that, you do have to favour G2 over Heretics in this particular matchup. It seems.
I know we've been super negative there, but I completely agree. Yes,
justifiably so. I think as well. I mean, they were going into the last day probably needing a win, depending on what other thing, like, which is kind of crazy.
Well, technically G2, both of them were in a similar position, which is kind of got wild, right?
Yeah. So anyway, moving on to the final matchup, of course, of playoffs, which is the aforementioned quote-unquote best current team in the league, KC, though not unbeatable, versus a team who I think are kind of more or less exactly as we expected, I guess. Like, this GX team feels like even their placement is kind of where I expected them to finish in regular season. For the most part, the players are performing relatively similar to how I thought they would perform. What are your thoughts, Sam, on this matchup? Do Giants stand a chance in hell? Also, I specifically want to get your thoughts on Jackie's as well, this split, because he's someone we've had the microscope on, I think, for 6 months now, at least.
Yeah, I think KC should just dismantle this, assuming they come in. But part of this is Reapered regular season team into early season playoffs, always very good. It's more later on in the year that we've seen Reaper teams maybe not have enough depth and struggle to grow out their skill sets sometimes. They're very good at defining their strengths, getting a core identity, and then kind of running out of additional options. Kind of happened on Cloud9 a number of times, right? Where they'd have those kind of like, yes, we play this way really well through early game, jungle invades, and then, okay, well, what about the other ways of playing the game that cost them across later series? But earlier on in the years, that were good. So maybe there's that kind of thing that comes into play later on with coaching philosophies. I doubt that, though, with where KC are at, though. And I think there is just a bit of a diffy in the mechanical situation-y. That's not the best phrase of all time, but there is that kind of element of like, yeah, KC, arguably best players in a number of different roles here. Quite good.
Remind me about your English lit degree.
Don't talk about it. No, it's never a problem. But
we've had like a 12-hour day, folks. This is coming at the end of a long day for us.
But I think for Jackie's, it was a decent start to the split. We saw Noah and Jun early spark. Wow, GX the top of the tables, and it all kind of fell apart. I think Jackie's has been struggling for consistent laning leads in matchups he should be finding leads in, or at least going even in.
Finding laning leads? I mean, okay, versus KCB he had a lead, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. But has he been? He's struggling to find laning leads in general, right? I think he has basically fumbled the ball a number of times. And don't get me wrong, I still think he's a decent team fighter. I still think he's like got okay hands, but his laning has been poor. And into someone like Yahoo who has come in and actually done a good job here, it's going to be a problem. And if you then have that bleed over into people like Kalist or over into Canna, for God's sake, Canna, oh my days, that's going to be terrifying. That will be problematic, especially if, as we've often seen, I think, around the world, mid laners who get their role quests early by roaming and getting the boots up early suddenly start linking up with junglers and making side lanes unplayable. It's been
worth noting that actually roaming slows down your role quests in mid laners.
But the point is, if you get to the point where you get involved in doing some damage and getting those plays happen,
sorry, getting involved after you have
yes, exactly, it can be very, very scary. And I do think that I think I lost my train of thought here a bit.
My bad, sorry.
When you've got players like Busio potentially who have been very good at making those proactive moves around the map, start linking up to pressure a player who has been very shaky in lane, I think GX, unless they have a solid first 10, even 5 minutes, are going to get dismantled everywhere you care to look. I'm not entirely certain where they're going to find easy options into Karmine core of all teams right now. Maybe through jungle, but even then, I think Yike's been playing pretty solidly here, even if I still have some concerns about his skirmishing picks. Like, he's still got some issues and things like the Shinzao, even if I think over the course of this split, he's been pretty solid.
What are your thoughts, Nymaera?
Isn't it Noah or bust? I think Noah can
Yeah.
be the best AD carry in the league. I will say, I don't think it's as doomed as it would have been last year, because I think that Lot has been stable. Lot's actually been all right. I think if you think about the way we were talking about Lot, well, this time last year and then most of last year, we were thinking, okay, this guy really not looking great. I think especially early on in spring, we're like, okay, Lot is actually a loss factor. I don't think that's true now. I think actually Lot's been majorly pretty good or moderate. Yeah, I think he's been fine. Majority of the time, rather. That's what I was going to say. I think Jackie's. I mean, yeah, I think that Jackie's team fighting hasn't really impressed me. I think that also early on into the game, he's definitely prime suspect for someone who will be overextended. That's a problem because I think that who's actually been solid. He's been more than solid actually. This guy's been, he's impressed me more than I thought he would be. I think GX need to get explosive leads through bot lane. You just need Noah to get onto something that he can outplay on, and then get him to a platform, and then just hope to God that Noah can out team fight. The problem is, KC are the best team fighting team in the league, lads. Like, you're hoping that Noah can somehow outplay in team fights the best team fighting team in the league.
I've also heard a rumor that Noah struggles every now and then to close out games with leads. Don't know where that came from. But
the thing is, he's been better with that this year. You think back to
high leverage
Fnatic.
Playoff games, Nymaera.
But like on Fnatic, that was worse. Obviously, that was worse. But I actually think he's been better at that.
There is an additional thing I'd like to put in here about Jack.
Sure.
Before we start going on, because Noah has actually, I think, been quite. Again, we'll see how he goes. With Noah in playoffs, different beast. We've seen that before. Yeah. But I would suggest people look at top mid laners win rates on Orianna this split across the world and see how unbelievably busted this champion has been. If Orianna is being let through in the LCK or LPL, it's hell on earth for the enemy laner. Like, it is a really hard time. Caps is undefeated on it this split despite G2's struggles. And again, like, you go look at it, oh, well, when Caps gets a lead, they look really good. Well, partly that's when he's got Orianna 3 times and just mashed people with Orianna because that champion is disgusting in lane. Jackie's is not even putting up the 10 CS a minute mark on Orianna, which basically everyone else is. He's 2-2 on the champion. Like, that's a glaring weakness. I know it's fearless, and that will help. You only have to deal with the Orianna once. But if you are getting Orianna and it's not an auto power point on your draft, that's not great. And again, the Azir's not been superb either, actually. I don't know if he even got a win on that one yet. Not sure.
Yeah,
I'd have to look that one up.
I mean, I thought that his early game versus KCB was fun, but again, that's kind of like versus KCB, a game which, of course, reminder, they lost. Yeah, I mean, GX...
He's 1-2. There you go.
GX are one of those teams which they very rarely performed in pressure scenarios. Very rarely, if ever, actually. I have a little bit more belief in them. I think that their drafts have been better than they were last year. I think their drafts have been solid. It really just has to be Noah or bust, though, for me. Like, this guy will either just pop off and get, like, 1 million kills, or I think it's just kind of doomed for GX. I think that... I don't actually think GX are, like, a bad team right now. I think they're... Despite, again, that loss, I don't think they're, like, that bad. I expect them to lose, though, just because KC are the best team in the league. I think the one weakness I'll say about KC is that sometimes when early games are very fast, I don't think they can keep up with them very well. Even Lost Ratones actually went pretty okay with them in their game, remember, which actually is pretty good in retrospect, because that was back in week 1, I seem to remember there. Yeah, I expect GX to... Put it this way, I expect GX to drop down to lower bracket and maybe snipe a team in lower bracket, though. I don't...
That's fair.
Yeah, I think they're a team you need to be a little worried about if they get, like, comfort picks, particularly, again, on, like, Noah, Kaiser, or Zyra, or blah, blah, blah.
I think... yeah. Maybe I'm being unfair here as well, because, again, I'm kind of... My opinion's been coloured by a really bad last week. Like, they got dismantled by both versions of Karmine.
No, but my problem is, like, GX have historically never performed under pressure. So if we take that as the benchmark for how do they perform under pressure, and that was obviously versus KCB, they're going to be up against a bigger team or whatever. I mean, I hope they do away with that, but until they actually perform in, like, a playoffs best of what are we left with? You know, and I know it's a little bit reductive, but I have to take a couple of percentage points off of them going into a big series because typically that has been a pretty strong indicator. They've not really. And I know we've talked about Noah on Fnatic. I actually think Noah himself has done fine. I actually think it's been the top side of the map which hasn't done very well, and particularly solo laners in high pressure scenarios, particularly in this team.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think Lot even started playing a bit better towards the end of last season, and more solid at least. But I think expecting to do well in Tier 1 League of Legends with 2 weak solo laners is like rough.
It's tough.
I'm trying to think if that's ever happened before, where a team who's had 2 weakish solo laners has ever gone on like a special run in any.
You can do it with 1, but 2 is hard. Like for instance, anyone's legend, Flandre is not good in lane. Like, but this guy does
very
crazy
hit
stuff.
and miss. Yeah.
You think? I mean, he's actually good enough in teamfight, so I wouldn't call him weak, right? But in terms of weak laning, I think sometimes you can just about get away with it and that's with like 1. Even then, it's
think of the last
pretty
time
rough.
our team, I remember actually doing something because the thing is, you might get a team that makes it to a decent run through playoffs, but how often do they actually then win the league / go international? And I am. At least relative to their local competition. Worth saying that. Relative to the local competition.
Who was Kuro's top laner most of the time?
Smeb, which
Smeb.
was insane.
Smeb.
Smeb
I was trying to think of
so
the starting point of like weak laners who'd done a lot and then remembering who their
yeah, exactly. And then you
think
think
of like, teacher Mar run.
Well,
when he couldn't make, he nearly didn't have the elo to get to play in playoffs.
Think
it was too low elo.
Top laner.
Someday.
Someday,
right?
Yeah. So again,
this is the problem. You can get away with 1, and like even like Durnby was I think one of the strong points of his team. But I'm trying to remember, was it Gimgoon or Zoom's top? I forget. It was Gimgoon, I think,
both
right? Who was like
points,
like, and they were like weaker. But then again, like you don't get away with 2 weak solo lanes. At that point, you're like, okay, well, you can't hold together a team.
Well, the poor jungler gets done in, right? Because you just lose a quadrant of the map every 2 minutes.
But yeah, I know that seems like kind of a simple way of looking at things, but I'm really not sure that a team should be going into a season having the sample size of a previous season and being, my solo laners are both weak, and I'm going to go into next season with them both being weak. To me, that seems kind of crazy because, as we've sort of laid out there, I don't think there has ever been a case in Tier 1 League where a team has done really well with 2 weak solo laners. I just don't think it's a thing that's ever happened. So, yeah, and as you say, it's not just, oh, they're disappointing or they're choking. It's like, if you can't get lane pressure, and Jackie's was never a good laner anyway. We made lots of comparisons to VTO, who's basically like VTO.
On debut was better, but now it's just like an active weakness, I think.
You're just giving up so much pressure on the map.
Like if he gets kills, then it's different, right? Like Jackie's with a couple kills, gets to be more of a playmaker, mover on the map. That's great, but like, how often does he ever get to that position? He's often playing from significant deficits. In fact, I'm curious. I'm gonna even look at GOL and see what's.
Oh, actually, in terms of weak laners, I actually think that some of the MKOI teams qualify when they had like Niski, who wasn't great in laner points. Maybe. But even then, it's like a really rare scenario. And even then, actually, Niski was playing well in those splits where they did well. Actually, at those
had
points,
humanoids, so that was
anyway, it's like, I'm sure there probably is one out there, but it's a very rare thing at best,
Yeah,
and they are an exception.
I think it's fair to say that this is a heavily favored on paper KC one. I think what's going to be interesting, actually, I'm going to make a little mini prediction now, which is I think that because obviously KC and G2 are on the same side of the bracket, I think that KC will send G2 to the lower bracket. And I have a feeling that G2 might pick it up as things go along, and they might meet again in the final, whatever they call it these days. But yeah, anyway, that's actually going to be it for this week, guys. So thank you all very much for watching. Thank you, Sam, for joining us, and we will see you next time.